Hello, horror lovers, welcome to our channel. Please subscribe, as it is our biggest motivation. Let us know in the comments which city you are listening from. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Now, let's get into the stories. We were all excited for the mission, though we each had our own reasons. Dr. Emerson was particularly interested in studying the migratory patterns of marine species. Dr. Singh wanted to observe plankton communities in a more natural environment, and Dr. Milford was eager to collect deep-water specimens for genetic analysis. As for me, I saw the mission as an opportunity to confront my greatest fear head-on, by being immersed in the very environment that haunted me. The day of our descent into the ocean was one I'll never forget. We boarded a transport vessel that took us to the designated drop zone for the Ceto station. The seas were calm that morning, with the sun gleaming off the water's surface like polished glass. Despite the stillness, my heart raced as we climbed aboard the station and prepared for our slow plunge into the ocean depths. The station was lowered with precision, the surface fading from view as the ocean swallowed us whole. As the light dimmed, I felt a deep unease, as if we were descending not into the water, but into some other world. The station's lights flickered on as we reached 40 meters. The exterior was now completely submerged in the blue-black expanse of the open ocean. There was no seabed to anchor us, no visible surface above, only the abyss stretching infinitely in every direction. The first day went by without incident. We spent most of it running diagnostics on Ceto's systems, ensuring that everything was in working order. The station was state-of-the-art, and everything seemed to be running smoothly. The real work would start the next day when we began our research. I was nervous, of course, but my nerves were drowned out by the excitement of the mission. We were breaking new ground, exploring uncharted territory. What could go wrong? That night, as I lay in my bunk, I couldn't sleep. The porthole in my cabin gave me a view of the endless ocean beyond. It was dark, with only the faintest glimmers of bioluminescent creatures occasionally flickering in the distance. My mind couldn't help but wander, imagining all the things that could be lurking just beyond the range of the station's lights. I tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on my breathing, reminding myself that the unknown was why I was here. But fear doesn't listen to logic. The second day started as planned. We began our research, with Dr. Emerson tracking a pod of dolphins that had wandered close to the station, and Dr. Singh collecting water samples to study the microscopic life forms inhabiting the waters. I assisted Dr. Milford in analyzing a series of DNA sequences from some specimens we'd collected on the surface before our descent. Around midday, we encountered our first anomaly. It was Dr. Emerson who spotted it through one of the portholes in the lab. He called us over, pointing excitedly. "Look at that," he said. "What do you think it is?" At first, none of us saw what he was pointing at. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it too, a large, shadowy figure, hovering in the water just outside the station. It was massive, far bigger than any marine animal I had ever seen. Its form was indistinct, blurry, as though the water itself was bending around it. "Is it a whale?" Dr. Singh asked. "No," Dr. Milford replied, squinting at the shape. "Whales don't move like that. It's just floating there." The thing didn't seem to be moving at all. It just hung in the water, motionless, as though it were watching us. There was something deeply unsettling about it, the way it seemed to exist on the very edge of perception, always just barely visible, like it didn't quite belong. I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't explain it, but something about that shadow felt wrong. It wasn't just its size or its strange, unnatural stillness. It was the sense that it was aware of us. I could feel it, deep in my bones, that whatever it was, it knew we were there, and it was waiting. For what? I couldn't say. We monitored the figure for a while, but it eventually faded back into the depths, disappearing as mysteriously as it had appeared. The rest of the day passed in an easy silence. We tried to continue our work, but that strange presence outside the station weighed heavily on all of us. That night, the dreams began. I don't know how to describe them in a way that would make sense. They weren't like normal dreams, with images or stories. It was more like a feeling, a vast, overwhelming sense of something enormous and ancient lurking beneath me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. It was cold, dark, and completely indifferent to my existence, and yet it was aware of me. It wanted something, though I couldn't say what. I woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding in my chest. The porthole in my cabin was dark again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the glass. The next morning, I wasn't the only one who looked worse for wear. Dr. Singh confessed she hadn't slept well either. She kept talking about strange noises in the night, like something was tapping on the walls of the station. Dr. Emerson dismissed it as just the station settling or currents brushing against the exterior. But I wasn't so sure. And then, on the third day, everything went wrong. It started with a power fluctuation. At first, it was just a flicker, a brief dimming of the lights that we chalked up to a minor systems malfunction. But as the day wore on, the flickers became more frequent, the lights dimming longer each time. Soon, we lost power to the external cameras, leaving us blind to the outside world. That's when the knocking started. It was faint at first, just a soft tapping that could easily have been mistaken for the movement of the water. But it grew louder, more insistent. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling. It was everywhere, and it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like something was deliberately knocking, trying to get in. Fear gripped me like a vice. I couldn't think clearly, couldn't focus on my work. All I could do was listen to that terrible knocking, my mind racing with thoughts of the shadow we had seen outside. Had it come back? Was it responsible for the power issues? By the time night fell, the knocking had become deafening, echoing through the station like a drumbeat. The others tried to stay calm, but I could see the fear in their eyes. We were all thinking the same thing, though none of us wanted to say it out loud. We weren't alone. Something was out there. Something was coming for us. I frowned as I listened to the eerie recording. There was something off about it, something unsettling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Bill seemed enthralled by the mystery of it all, but a deep unease settled in my gut. Maybe it was just the fever, or maybe it was the way the sound felt wrong, almost artificial. What do you think? Bill asked, his eyes wide with excitement. I don't know, I admitted. It sounds ... strange, like it's trying too hard. Exactly. Bill nodded enthusiastically. It's bizarre, but that's what makes it interesting. We could be on the brink of discovering something new here. Maybe it's some kind of unknown species, or maybe it's sick. I interrupted, the thought creeping up on me out of nowhere. The strange fluctuations in the sound reminded me of something malfunctioning, like a machine struggling to work properly. What if whatever creature was out there wasn't trying to communicate with us, but was in distress? Bill's smile faltered for a second. Sick. I mean, I guess that's a possibility, but it doesn't sound like a distressed call to me. It's too deliberate. Maybe ... I trailed off, the thudding in my head making it hard to focus. I didn't want to argue. Not with Bill, and not when I was barely able to stay upright. "Hey, you should get some rest," Bill said, noticing my discomfort. "We'll keep an eye on it, and if anything changes, I'll let you know." "Yeah," I muttered, suddenly feeling overwhelmingly exhausted. "Keep me posted." I shuffled back to my bunk, but sleep didn't come easily. Even after I closed my eyes, the strange, haunting sound of the recording echoed in my mind, twisting into something even more unsettling. In my feverish state, I imagined that whatever was making that noise wasn't just a whale. It was something else, something that was watching us, waiting. That night, I had another dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. It was more like a feeling, a presence in the darkness. I was back in the station, but I wasn't alone. Something was moving outside, something huge, its shadow looming just beyond the porthole in my cabin. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its immense size, its cold, calculating awareness. And then the knocking started again. Soft at first, barely perceptible over the hum of the station. But it grew louder, more insistent, like it was coming from every direction. I woke up in a cold sweat, the knocking still echoing in my ears. I blinked, trying to orient myself, my heart pounding. The porthole was dark, and the room was silent. For a moment, I thought it had just been part of the dream. Then I heard it again, faint, but unmistakable. A rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the walls of the station. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't imagining it. The knocking was real. I stumbled out of bed and made my way down the narrow corridor toward the control room. The lights flickered slightly as I passed, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. My pulse quickened. Something was wrong. When I reached the control room, I found Bill already there, staring at the sonar screen with a mixture of confusion and concern. Dr. Singh and Dr. Milford were there too, both looking equally unsettled. "You hear it too?" I asked, my voice shaking. Bill nodded, his eyes fixed on the monitor. "It started about 20 minutes ago. We thought it was just the current at first, but double quotes, but it's not." Dr. Milford finished for him. She looked pale, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a nervous edge. "It's too rhythmic, too deliberate. And look at this," Bill said, pointing to the sonar screen. The strange shape we had seen earlier was back, but this time it was closer, much closer. The massive blob on the screen was hovering just outside the station, its edges clearly defined. Whatever it wasn't moving, but it was close enough now that we could see just how massive it was. "That's not a whale," Dr. Singh whispered, her voice barely audible. None of us responded. We all knew she was right. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, this time more violently. The station creaked, a low, groaning sound that sent a shiver down my spine. The knocking grew louder, faster, as if whatever was out there was growing impatient. The cramped space. As I got closer, I could hear something, soft, rhythmic tapping, like the sound of fingers drumming against metal. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, just a few feet from the airlock. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, suffocating silence. I held my breath, straining to hear, my entire body trembling. Then suddenly, a voice came through the radio again. But this time it wasn't Bill's. It was a chorus, a mix of voices, Bill's, Singh's, Milford's, all speaking in unison, their tones flat, hollow, as if they were all repeating the same rehearsed lines. "Come outside. We're waiting for you. It's beautiful out here." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. and ran back to the control room, slamming the door behind me. My breathing was ragged, panic clawing at my insides. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew I had to get out. Whatever was pretending to be my friends wasn't human, and whatever had happened to them, I couldn't save them now. I darted over to the communications console, fumbling with the controls, desperately trying to send out a distress signal to the mainland team. My fingers were shaking so badly that I could barely keep a grip on the controls, but after a few seconds, I managed to get the signal out. "Mayday, this is the Ceto station," I gasped into the microphone, my voice trembling. "We've lost 3 crew members. Something's out here. Please, send help immediately." I repeated the message over and over, praying that someone, anyone, would hear me. The lights flickered again, and the station creaked ominously, like something was pressing harder against it, testing its structural integrity. My mind raced with terror. I didn't know how much longer the station would hold. And then, just as suddenly as the tapping had started, the radio fell silent. The voices stopped. I stared at the console, dread gnawing at me. What now? Suddenly, the sonar screen beeped. I glanced at it, my heart skipping a beat. The shape, the thing that had been sitting outside the station, was gone. But that wasn't all. The power flickered once more, and the emergency lights dimmed. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. The generator was failing. I bolted from the control room, racing down the corridor toward the equipment bay. If the generator went down, I'd lose power, oxygen, and communication with the surface. I needed to reset it now. My footsteps echoed through the narrow hall, and for the first time, I became acutely aware of how alone I was. I reached the generator room and grabbed the manual reset lever, yanking it down with all my strength. The generator sputtered and whined, but after a few agonizing seconds, the power came back on, the lights flickering to life. Relief flooded through me for a brief moment, until I heard it from behind me. In the darkness of the hallway, a soft, hollow voice whispered, "Come outside." I spun around, but the hallway was empty. I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever was pretending to be my friends, whatever had lured them outside, was now inside the station with me, and I didn't have much time. Bang, bang, bang. The noises grew louder, almost as if whoever, or whatever, was outside was getting frustrated. I cranked up the volume, but the banging intensified, shaking the walls of the house. I felt sick to my stomach with dread. If I didn't respond, would it try to break in? Reluctantly, I muted the TV and crept toward the window. I only opened it a tiny crack, just enough to speak. "Go away," I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. Bella shook violently behind me, like she did during thunderstorms or fireworks. What followed made my blood run cold. "Go away," the voice outside mimicked, but it wasn't a normal voice. It was garbled, wet, as though someone was speaking with a mouthful of water. "Go away, go away, go away, go away," it repeated, each time sounding more like my own voice, like it was practicing. The banging resumed, harder than before. Bang. "Go away," it mocked. Bang, bang, bang. "Go away." Then came the dragging again, slow this time, deliberate. It was circling the house, moving toward my window. I froze. My instinct told me to hide, to crawl back into bed and pretend this wasn't happening. Bang, bang, bang. The sound climbed the side of the house, growing louder as it neared. My breath caught in my throat. I managed to drop the curtain back in place just as something slapped against the window. Hard. I stumbled backward, falling to the floor. From the other side of the window, I heard it. Meow. That was it. I scrambled up, grabbed Bella, and bolted for the bathroom. We locked ourselves in, and I didn't move for the rest of the night. The bathroom had no windows, and that was all that mattered. Bella curled up next to me, still trembling, and we waited in silence until Jake came home. When Jake got back, he wanted to know why I didn't answer his calls during his break. He doesn't really believe me. He thinks I had some sort of waking nightmare. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. Something was out there. Something banged on my walls, mimicked my voice, and crawled up to my window. The greasy handprint it left behind on the glass proves it. I'm trying to keep my composure as I type this, but every minute that passes, the pressure mounts. I can hear them more clearly now. Bill, saying Milford. Their voices rise and fall in strange, haunting unison, growing louder with every passing second. The distortion I heard earlier has faded, and now they sound almost real, almost like they're right here in the room with me. The temptation to believe them, to trust that they're still alive, gnaws at my sanity. They tell me it's safe, that everything will be fine if I just come outside. But deep down, I know they're not my friends anymore. Whatever's out there, whatever took them, has learned how to mimic them, learned their patterns, their speech, even their jokes. I don't know what's worse, the fact that I'm here alone, or that part of me still wants to believe them. Every time I start to lose control, I look back at the sonar screen. That massive shape, bigger than anything I could have imagined, still lingers just outside the station, its presence looming in the inky black. And every so often it shifts, moving slightly closer, as though it's testing the boundaries of the station, seeing if it can slip in undetected. The weight of the air feels heavier now, like something is pressing in from all sides, and the station creaks under the pressure. My hands are shaking so much that it's hard to keep typing, but I have to keep going. I have to finish this. If I don't, you'll never know the truth. Aquatech responded quickly when I called, but they have no idea what they're sending their rescue team into. They don't understand. By the time they get here, it'll be too late for me, maybe for all of us. I want to warn them, tell them not to come, but my connection to the outside world is barely functioning. Every message I try to send comes back garbled, fragmented. It's as if the darkness outside the station is interfering with everything, communications, power, even time itself. There's a new sound now. A low, rumbling hum vibrating through the walls, like the deep resonance of something massive moving through the water. It's constant, unrelenting, and it feels like the entire station is trembling in response. The thing out there, it's no whale. It's no ordinary creature. It's hunting me. I don't know how it's done it, but it's found a way inside my head. It's using my colleagues' voices to wear me down, and I can feel the weight of its presence growing stronger with every passing minute. The urge to just open the hatch and step outside is becoming overwhelming. I keep telling myself it's a lie, that it's all in my head, but the whispers, God, the whispers are so convincing. There's something ancient about it. Something that's been lurking in the depths of the ocean long before humans even knew what the deep was. We're invaders here, trespassers in its territory, and now it's making sure we pay the price. I try to keep my eyes on the clock, reminding myself that the rescue team will be here soon, but time feels wrong in this place. The hours stretch and twist, making it impossible to tell how much longer I need to hold out. Every time I look at the window, that same oppressive darkness presses against the glass, thicker and closer than before. It's like the thing outside is waiting, biding its time. And that's when I realize the truth. It doesn't need to break in. It's already here. I can hear it moving through the station now, a slow, deliberate dragging sound, like something massive and wet slithering across the metal floor. My heart races as I press myself against the wall, trying to stay as quiet as possible. But I know it's too late. I know it can hear me, sense me. It doesn't want to kill me, not yet. It wants me to surrender. The air around me has turned icy cold, and my breath comes out in shallow, ragged bursts. I'm trying to keep my mind sharp, trying to resist the pull of whatever's out there, but it's so hard. The voices are so gentle now, so comforting, telling me that everything will be okay if I just open the door. I glance at the hatch, my hands trembling. It would be so easy. I feel the floor beneath me shift, a soft vibration running through the metal, and I realize that the station isn't just creaking anymore, it's moving. I stumble forward, clutching the edge of the bunk to keep from falling over. The whole station is being pulled, dragged by the creature outside. It's trying to take me deeper, further into the abyss where no one will ever find me. I hear Bill's voice again, right behind me, as if he's standing just over my shoulder. Come outside, man. We're waiting for you. I know it's not him. I know that, but I'm so tired. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. The walls of the station groan, bending under the pressure as the dragging sound grows louder, closer. The rescue team, they have no idea what they're walking into. They won't stand a chance. I have to stop it. I have to warn them. But how? The voices are growing louder now, echoing through every corner of the station. They're no longer just outside. They're inside my mind, slipping into every thought, every fear. I can't escape them. I'm running out of time. If you're reading this, if you ever find this, don't come for me. Don't send help. It's already too late. This thing, it doesn't want to be found. And if you come here, it will find you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can hear them now, right outside the door. They're calling my name. I think I might let them in. Working as a janitor isn't usually the most glamorous job, but when I saw an opening for a night janitor paying $40 an hour, I couldn't believe my luck. In a small, rural town in the middle of the Georgia swamps, $40 an hour is almost unheard of. And to clean a church, easy money, I thought. My agnostic heart didn't mind working in a church for that kind of pay. The job was simple. I worked 3 nights a week, cleaning after services or meetings. It usually took 2 or 3 hours, with one extended clean on Wednesday nights that stretched to 7 hours. For the most part, it was quiet, peaceful work. The church was old, dating back to colonial times, and had been rebuilt a few times, but the history of the place intrigued me. The mystery of the Blue Dwarf Church itself was typical of small Southern Protestant buildings, one large sanctuary with a couple of rooms in the back. However, there was something odd, a small hallway leading to a blue door, painted a bright, unnatural shade of cerulean. The door was padlocked and deadbolted from the outside, and only Pastor William had the key. When I asked the church's treasurer, Anita, about it, she shrugged it off, saying it was probably just an old storage cellar. Now, having grown up in Georgia, I knew a thing or two about swampy land. You don't build basements out here unless you want a muddy, flooded mess. So how could there be a cellar in this church? Something didn't sit right with me. The first encounter on my first Monday night, everything went smoothly. I vacuumed, dusted, and went home with no issues. By Wednesday, I had settled into a routine. After service, I started cleaning around 8:30 p.m., figuring I'd take my time to make sure everything was spotless. I worked my way through the sanctuary, down the hallway, and into the rooms in the back. It wasn't until I was cleaning the pastor's office that I noticed something strange. Through the door, I could see down the hallway, into the sanctuary. The only light was coming from the altar, casting long shadows across the pews. That's when I saw them. Sitting in the first 2 rows, just out of reach of the light, were 7 or 8 figures. They were dressed in black, their heads bowed, as if in prayer. I squinted to get a better look, but I couldn't make out their faces. My heart started to race. There wasn't supposed to be anyone here. Then came the thump. It was loud, like something heavy hitting the blue door. I whipped my head toward the sound, and when I looked back, the figures were gone. The sanctuary was empty. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to rationalize what I had just seen. My mind was racing, but I tried to shake it off as some kind of late-night hallucination. Maybe I was just tired. I finished up as quickly as I could, my hands trembling as I locked the doors. As I turned off lights, the sanctuary was bathed in the eerie glow of moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a chill ran down my spine. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I wasn't about to stick around to find out who, or what, was following me. I bolted out of the church, slamming the door behind me. The haunting hymn was halfway to my car when I realized I hadn't locked the front door. My gut told me to leave it, but my brain, thinking about rent and bills, forced me to go back. I grabbed my keys, hands shaking, and rushed back to the door. As I turned the key, I heard it, a chorus of voices singing from inside the sanctuary, accompanied by the swell of an organ. My blood ran cold as I recognized the words. Nothing can, for sin atone, nothing but the blood of Jesus, naught of good that I have done, nothing but the blood of Jesus. I didn't stick around to listen. I locked the door and ran to my car, driving off so fast I'm pretty sure I hit a ditch on the way out. The pastor's response went back to the church on Friday, still unnerved by what I had experienced. I casually brought up the noise behind the blue door to Pastor William. For a split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear maybe, but he quickly masked it with his usual friendly smile, telling me that possums had been getting into the cellar and making noise. Possums, right? I've seen possums before. There's no way that thump was caused by one. I'm heading back to the church tonight after the prayer meetings, and I can't shake the feeling that something's waiting for me there. The chills, the footsteps, the figures in the pews, it's all too much to ignore. I don't know what's going on in that church, but I'm starting to think there's something far more sinister than possums hiding behind that blue door. If tonight's anything like last time, I might just start praying after all. Honestly, I've worked some really terrible jobs before, but nothing has caused me the level of dread I felt before heading into this place. I mean, I've dealt with worse, like when I worked in a call center for healthcare. I used to get yelled at constantly by people, blaming me for their denied heart medication and acting like it was life or death over a $3 charge. Not exactly a dream job, but I'd take that over this any day, if it paid the same. So last night, I headed in early to clean after the prayer meetings, hoping I might catch William and maybe get into that mysterious blue door. But no luck. William is definitely hiding something, and he's being more secretive than ever. After the last of the older men left with a casual wave, William started to walk back to his office. I was getting my cleaning supplies ready, hoping to finish before dark. You know it's bad when you're thankful for the sun staying up until 9 in the summer. Before he could disappear down the hall, I asked him if I should clean behind the blue door. He just smiled, but there was something off about it. Maybe concern, I don't know. He gave me a flimsy excuse about how he'd done a spring cleaning back in May and told me to focus on the main areas where people go. Weird, but fine. Then he hit me with a bombshell. There's a wedding tomorrow, and he needed a deep clean of the whole place. Great. I wasn't ready for that at all. I tried to make up some excuse about having a family event, but he insisted I come back after the wedding. He needed it spotless by tomorrow with no other options and no time to run home. I just got to work as fast as I could. I've never cleaned that quickly in my life. I dusted every corner, scrubbed baseboards, and even had to pull out the carpet cleaner. Time flew by, and before I realized it, the sun had gone down. The church lights are so bright with the stained glass that it's hard to notice, but once I realized it was dark, I started to feel trapped. And to make things worse, I forgot my phone charger. Fantastic. I put my phone on power saver and went into overdrive with the cleaning. About half an hour later, I was up on a stepladder, wiping down the stained glass windows, getting loads of dust off. Suddenly, something slammed into the window hard enough that I thought it would shatter. The noise was so loud it almost knocked me off the ladder, but somehow I caught myself. I gathered my nerve and went outside to see what could have hit the window so hard. There was nothing, just the small, worn-down graveyard next to the church, casting creepy shadows in the light of a single street lamp. Then I noticed something off. One of the shadows was longer than the others. When I looked closer, I saw a tall man in a dark suit with a wide-brimmed hat standing by one of the graves. At this point, things became a blur. Seeing some creepy figure standing in the graveyard was not something I was prepared for. I bolted back inside, locked the door, deadbolted it, and ran to William's office, locking myself in. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but of course, there was no signal. To make things worse, my phone battery had drained to 15%, even though I had it on power saver. Just as I tried to make another call, my phone died. Now I'm stuck, trying to figure out what to do. Do I hide in the office or risk going to my car? After a few minutes, I started to calm down a bit, trying to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was just a tall gravestone, right? It couldn't have been a person. Probably. I decided to get back to cleaning, figuring it was the best way to distract myself. Just a few windows left and then the baptism pool, which wouldn't take long. Things were going fine, until I heard the scream. I froze. It was the kind of scream that makes your blood run cold. It sounded like a woman, full of grief and rage, and it was coming from inside the church. I knew right away it was coming from behind the blue door. The screaming kept going, echoing through the building. Then it just stopped. I found myself standing in the hallway, torn between running out of there and investigating. Part of me thought that maybe someone was in trouble. I couldn't just leave if someone needed help, right? So I knocked on the blue door. After a moment, I heard a faint voice, maybe saying hello. I called out, asking who they were. No answer. I knocked again, nothing. On the third knock, all hell broke loose. The lights started flickering, on and off just long enough to mess with my vision. My eyes were struggling to adjust to the dark between the flashes. I turned around to leave, but when I looked back toward the sanctuary, there was a whole congregation standing there, just standing, staring. Then the lights flickered again, and they were gone. I let out a scream like something straight out of a cartoon and ran for my keys, which were on the front pew. But before I could grab them, I heard splashing from behind me. The baptism pool was filling up, except it wasn't water. It was deep red, almost like blood, mixed with bursts of black sludge. I felt sick. I wasn't about to wait around to find out what was going on, so I turned to grab my keys. That's when I came face to face with one of the ghostly churchgoers. We were nose to nose, and the face was all wrong. It was pale and waxy, but the worst part was its eyes, or lack thereof, just hollow, empty sockets. It opened its mouth, and the stench that came out was unbearable. I grabbed my keys and ran down the aisle, the organ screeching out of tune behind me. I barely managed to get the door open and bolted out to my car. I didn't stop until I was home, shaking and trying to process everything. The next morning, I got a text from William. You'd think he'd be asking what the hell happened, right? Nope. He just said, "Wow, cleanest I've seen this place in years. Amazing job, thank you." What the hell? I'm going to do some research on the church and the cemetery, maybe even on William. Something is not right here. And for those asking why I don't just quit, it's simple, I'm broke. Plus, I need to figure out what's behind that blue door. For now, I'm taking a break until after Wednesday's service. I'll update if anything else happens, but I'm definitely not staying overnight again anytime soon. Edit. Reddit banned me for a week, so updates will have to wait. Edit for the edit. I'm back, folks. Why don't you open that one next, sweetheart? That Christmas was lovely. One of the best in a while. In recent years, my parents hadn't been able to drive up as often, on account of the heavy snow. Heaviest in 30 years, my father would say when I pleaded with him to visit. I could hear him puffing on his cigar and rocking back in his armchair, chuckling. There's no way we could make it there and back before next Christmas. But this year, the snow finally let up, and they made the trip. I couldn't have been happier. Leaning into my husband's side, I watched as our daughter tore the wrapping paper off her final present, a huge grin spreading across her face, a doll house. I gasped. It was enormous, pristine, with 3 stories, tiny flower pots hanging from the windowsills, and even a little front yard. I reached out and touched the plastic grass to make sure it wasn't real. My daughter was over the moon. She had been begging for a dollhouse for months, but I'd held off, knowing what her grandparents were planning. "It's beautiful, Ma," I said, admiring the craftsmanship. "It's so pretty." My daughter squealed, running to hug my mother and father. They laughed, patting her head, telling her they'd do anything to make her happy. I couldn't stop staring at the dollhouse. "Where did you find this?" I asked, gently tapping on the tiny windows, which almost looked like real glass. "Found it online." My father grunted as he leaned forward to unlatch the walls and open it up. The inside was even more beautiful than the outside, with tiny, realistic artwork on the walls. From a nice family. Funny thing, they never even accepted our payment. Just some real nice folks. A little doll family sat neatly on the living room couch, staring up at us with their blank, smiling faces. "A happy family of 4, my mother said sweetly, clasping her hands together. "Just like you." Just then, my son's remote control car crashed into the dollhouse, sending it tumbling over. My daughter started shouting, and my husband squeezed my waist before jumping up to mediate, bribing them with Christmas cookies. I looked down at the dolls, now spilled onto the floor. They're simple, happy faces still smiling. I carefully placed them back on the couch, straightening them just right. I couldn't help myself. The weeks after Christmas were chaotic, as they often are. Between packing away decorations and picking up stray bits of wrapping paper, I was busy. But I didn't mind. It was nice having the children home during winter break. The house was always full of noise and energy, and it distracted me from the loneliness that crept in during the school year when my husband was at work and the kids were gone all day. I didn't want to think about the day they'd leave for college. The idea of an empty nest terrified me. It hadn't been my dream to be a stay-at-home mother. But once I met my husband, things changed. I'd always wanted to be an artist, but that wasn't the kind of career you could easily fall back on. Fate, I figured, had other plans for me. Every night, after my family had eaten dinner and the dishes were done, I would go check on the kids before bed. It was my favorite part of the day. I'd crack open their doors, listen to their soft breathing, and watch the rise and fall of their blankets. My daughter was 10, and my son 12, so sometimes I'd catch them up past their bedtime, sneaking in one last game or play session with their new toys. I'd often hear scrambling as I walked down the hall, followed by exaggerated snoring as I peeked inside. I never had the heart to scold them. However, after a few nights of checking on my daughter and noticing that the lights in her dollhouse were still on, I started to feel uneasy. One morning, I decided to ask her about it. The house plunged into darkness, leaving only the echoes of my daughter's sniffles and my son's guilty apologies hanging in the air. My husband sighed and muttered something about the fuse box, and I felt his hand squeeze mine in the pitch black. "I'll check it out," he said, fumbling his way past me toward the stairs. "Stay with them." The sudden stillness in the house made every small sound amplified. The creak of the floor beneath my feet, the distant hum of the wind outside, the soft rustling of my daughter's clothing as she tried to steady herself. I pulled her closer, still feeling unsettled by the odd sensation of déjà vu. "I didn't mean to, Mom," my son whispered. "I just ... I don't know what happened." "I know," I murmured, gently brushing his hair back. "It's all right, Kev. Just take it easy next time." I led both kids down the hall toward the bathroom, keeping them close. I grabbed a bandage from the cabinet and started cleaning the small cut on Sylvie's knee. She winced but didn't complain, her focus elsewhere. "Mama," she whispered, barely audible. "You believe me, right, about Kev and the dollhouse?" I froze for a moment, recalling our conversation from that morning. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Her eyes widened slightly as she looked at the shadowed hallway behind us. "Kev didn't push me. Not on purpose. It's like the dolls made him do it." The words sent a chill up my spine. "The dolls?" "Sylvie, that's just pretend." But she shook her head, her face earnest and serious. "No, Mama. Ever since we got the dollhouse, things happen when I play with it. It's like the dolls ... they do things to us." A knot tightened in my stomach. "What kind of things?" Sylvie glanced nervously toward her room. "Things like what happened tonight. The girl doll fell over, and then I fell. The boy doll was standing over her, and then Kev was standing over me. Just like in the dollhouse." Before I could respond, the power flickered back on. Light filled the room again, and everything seemed normal, if not for the strange unease gnawing at me. I wanted to brush it off as her imagination, but something in her voice made me hesitate. My husband returned from the basement, brushing his hands together. "All right. I think that'll hold for now. How's Sylvie?" I smiled at him, trying to hide my apprehension. "She's all right. Just a little scrape. He nodded and gave the kids a quick once-over before heading back downstairs, but my mind was still swirling. Was Sylvie's imagination really running wild? Or was there something more to what she was saying? Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I found myself drawn to Sylvie's room again. I quietly pushed open her door, my eyes landing on the dollhouse in the corner. The lights were off, the little family perfectly posed as I had left them earlier, but something felt different. Almost like the air in the room was heavier. I walked over to the dollhouse, hesitant. My fingers reached for the little family inside, and just as I was about to close the house for the night, I stopped. The dolls had moved. The boy was now lying on the floor, and the father was standing over him, his little plastic face frozen in the same blank smile. The mother and daughter were sitting on the couch, and changed, but the whole scene felt wrong. I stepped back, my heart racing in my chest. I hadn't touched the dolls since earlier, and I was sure no one else had either. A soft creak sounded from behind me, and I spun around, half expecting to see one of my kids standing there. But the room was empty. I swallowed hard and turned back to the dollhouse, closing it carefully, as if not to disturb the family inside. Something was very wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was just getting started. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I stared at the dolls. There was something deeply unsettling about the way they were posed, like they were in the middle of a secret conversation, frozen in time. I had never seen my daughter play with them like this, and I hadn't touched them since I put the dollhouse in the attic. I turned my attention to the parents, half expecting them to be seated on the couch, as I had left them. But they weren't. The father doll stood in the kitchen, facing the tiny stove, his plastic hands gripping the edge of the counter. The mother doll, she was in the upstairs bedroom, but no longer standing in the corner. Instead, she was lying flat on the bed, her face turned toward the window. Something about her posture made my stomach churn. It was too lifelike, too realistic for a simple doll. Her limbs, usually stiff and immovable, were posed almost naturally, as if she had laid down there herself. I stepped back, a sense of nausea washing over me. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt heavy and oppressive, like the attic was suffocating me. I shut the dollhouse with a loud snap and immediately dragged it across the floor. It was heavier than I remembered, but my fear fueled my strength. I wrestled it down the attic stairs, breathing hard, my heart pounding in my chest, determined to get rid of it once and for all. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard the front door creak open. "Sylvie, Kev," I called out, hoping to hear the familiar thudding of backpacks hitting the floor. No answer. The house was quiet, except for my ragged breathing and the soft creak of the dollhouse wheels as I shoved it across the floor. I didn't care if I had to break it or toss it in the trash. I just needed it gone. But when I reached the front door, the handle wouldn't budge. I pulled and tugged, but it was like the door had been sealed shut. I tried not to panic, forcing myself to breathe. "It's just stuck," I told myself. Old house, old hinges. But as I turned back, I swore I heard something faint behind me, a soft, whispering sound, like someone talking in the next room, too quiet to make out the words. I whipped around, my eyes scanning the hallway, but there was nothing there. Just the empty space where the dollhouse used to sit. The noise stopped as quickly as it had started. With a trembling hand, I reached for my phone and dialed my husband's number. It rang twice before he picked up. Double quotes, "Hey babe, everything okay? I need you to come home," I blurted out, unable to keep the tremor out of my voice. Now, there was a pause on the other end. What's going on? You sound off. I can't explain it. Just, please come home. Now. He didn't argue, sensing the urgency in my tone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As soon as I hung up, I felt a wave of guilt. I didn't even know how to explain what was happening. How could I? My mind was spinning, and none of this made sense. I glanced back at the dollhouse, now sitting by the door, its tiny windows still glowing faintly. I grabbed the whole thing and marched outside, heading straight for the trash bin. I threw open the lid and was about to toss the dollhouse in when I hesitated. Something, or maybe someone, was looking at me through the window. I leaned in, squinting. There, staring out from behind the tiny kitchen counter, was the father doll, his face still frozen in that hollow, blank smile. Except this time, his eyes were glowing. I screamed, dropping the dollhouse and stumbling back. The plastic shell cracked as it hit the driveway, spilling its contents across the ground. The mother doll rolled out, landing face up on the concrete. Her previously expressionless face now seemed to be twisted in a silent scream, her mouth wide open, her eyes full of terror. I ran back into the house, slamming the door behind me. I didn't care about the dollhouse anymore. Let it rot out there. I didn't care if someone else found it, or if it stayed in the garbage forever. All I knew was that I wanted nothing more to do with it. I backed away from the dollhouse, shaking. My mind raced to make sense of the horrifying scene. How could a doll bleed? How could a simple piece of plastic have bone, flesh, and blood? I wiped my fingers on my jeans, smearing the dark crimson across the fabric. Desperately, I peered into the dollhouse, my hands trembling as I took in the rest of the miniature scene. The father doll lay slumped in the corner, his head twisted at an unnatural angle. His neck appeared broken, hanging limp like a rag doll. His clothes were torn, and his tiny, painted-on face was contorted in what looked like agony. But it was the mother doll that made my stomach turn the most. She wasn't on the couch anymore. She was standing. The mother doll was standing in the kitchen, holding a knife, a tiny, plastic kitchen knife, stained with red. Her eyes, which were once lifeless, seemed sharper now, almost as if they were watching me, daring me to come closer. Her painted-on smile was gone, replaced by a grimace. I felt as if I was staring into a reflection of myself, broken and filled with rage. A thought struck me, a horrible, creeping realization that made my skin crawl. Was this a reflection of our family? My son injured, broken, my husband lifeless, as if his betrayal had stripped away any remaining humanity. And me, standing there, gripping the knife, consumed by fury. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst from my chest. I couldn't stay in the house. I had to leave. I had to run. Without a second thought, I grabbed my phone and ran out the front door, barefoot and still wearing my pajamas. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I kept going, not caring where I ended up. I needed to be as far away from that cursed dollhouse as possible. I ran down the street, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My neighbors' houses passed by in a blur. I could feel my mind unraveling, my thoughts bouncing between the horror I had just witnessed and the painful betrayal of my husband. Eventually, I found myself at a park, collapsing onto a bench near the playground. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the swings swaying in the gentle breeze. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a soft, dusky glow, I made a decision. I couldn't just run away forever. I had to do something. I needed to destroy the dollhouse. It wasn't just a toy anymore. It was something much darker, something that was tearing my family apart. Maybe it had been influencing us this whole time, the growing distance between us, my daughter's silence, the way my husband had drifted away from me. I couldn't let it keep doing this. I had to end it. When I returned home, the house was quiet. The kids were already in bed, and my husband wasn't around. I didn't care where he was or what he was doing. All I cared about was getting rid of the dollhouse once and for all. I marched straight to the living room where it still sat, glowing faintly in the dark like a beacon of evil. The blood on the tiny table had dried, leaving a dark, sticky residue. With trembling hands, I picked up the dollhouse and carried it outside. I could feel the weight of it, heavier than any normal toy should be, almost as if it was alive with the malice it harbored. I grabbed a can of lighter fluid from the garage and poured it over the dollhouse. The liquid soaked into the tiny furniture, dripping from the roof and pooling beneath it. I struck a match and tossed it onto the dollhouse. The flames roared to life, engulfing the house in a bright, crackling blaze. I watched as the plastic melted and twisted, the figures inside collapsing into the fire. The mother doll was the last to go, her face contorted in an expression of anger as the flames consumed her dot as the dollhouse burned. I felt something lift inside me, like a weight being pulled from my chest. The oppressive feeling that had been haunting our home, the darkness that had wormed its way into our lives, it was all going up in flames. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace, but that peace was short-lived. From the charred remains of the dollhouse, a faint, eerie whisper filled the air. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it again, a voice, soft and menacing. "You can't get rid of me that easily." I stumbled back, my heart racing, as I stared at the smoldering pile of ash. And in the ashes, I could swear I saw the faint outline of a doll, a tiny figure, rising slowly from the embers. The smile that stretched across my face felt foreign, like it didn't belong to me. I touched my cheek, half expecting to feel the cold, smooth surface of plastic, but all I found was my own warm skin. My reflection in the glass window shimmered, and for a moment I swore the eyes looking back at me were hollow, dark, empty holes where my soul used to be. I blinked, and everything was normal again. I turned away from the window, but the image of myself, that grotesque, smiling version, stuck with me. It had been so vivid, the smile, the blank expression. It was all too much like the doll in the house. The mother doll, the one who had stood among the bodies, the one holding the shotgun. I could still see the dollhouse from where I stood, its tiny blood-stained walls and shattered family lying in ruin. My stomach churned, and I had to fight back the urge to vomit. This nightmare was taking on a life of its own, and it felt like I was no longer in control. The guilt was unbearable. My son had fallen down the stairs because of me. His broken arm, his cries of pain as they wheeled him into the hospital. It was all my fault. How could I ever make it up to him? How could I ever be the mother he needed, the wife my husband wanted? But worse, how could I ignore the fact that a piece of me didn't care? That blank smile in the window had betrayed me. It had shown me what I feared most, that somewhere deep inside, a part of me was fine with this, fine with watching everything crumble around me, fine with destroying the people I loved the most. I stumbled back to the dollhouse, driven by an overwhelming need to confront whatever had taken hold of my life. I reached for it, determined to throw it into the trash, to burn it again if I had to. But as soon as my fingers grazed the roof, a sharp jolt of pain shot up my arm, forcing me to pull back. The dollhouse was warm, pulsing beneath my hand like it was alive. No, no more games. I grabbed the dollhouse with both hands, determined to end it once and for all. But the second I lifted it, I heard a voice. Mom ... double quotes, my breath caught in my throat. The voice wasn't coming from the dollhouse. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. My daughter stood in the doorway, her eyes wide and her face pale. She looked so small, so fragile. For a moment, I thought she was a doll too, one of the plastic figures come to life, standing there to mock me. But it was really her. Mom. She whispered again, her voice trembling. What's happening? I couldn't answer her. I didn't have any words. How could I explain the madness that had consumed our lives? How could I explain the strange pull of the dollhouse, the visions, the violent thoughts that had started to feel so real? I'm trying to protect us, I managed to say, my voice shaky and uncertain. I'm trying to keep you safe. My daughter looked at the dollhouse, then back at me. But it's hurting us, Mom. You're hurting us. Her words struck me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the truth was already sinking in. She was right. I had been so consumed by the dollhouse, by the fear and paranoia, that I had let it twist me into something unrecognizable. I had hurt my son, pushed my husband away, terrified my own children, all because of this cursed thing. I turned back to the dollhouse, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear or anger. I just felt tired. So tired. With trembling hands, I picked up the dollhouse and carried it outside again. This time, I didn't pour lighter fluid on it. I didn't set it on fire. I simply opened the trash can, dropped it inside, and closed the lid. As I stood there, staring at the trash can, I realized that destroying the dollhouse wasn't going to fix everything. It wasn't going to undo the damage I had done. But maybe it was a start. I went back inside, and my daughter was waiting for me at the door. She took my hand, her small fingers wrapping around mine, and led me upstairs. In my son's room, he lay on his bed, his arm wrapped in a cast, but he smiled weakly when he saw me. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I'm so sorry. He didn't say anything, but the way he reached out for me, the way he pulled me into a gentle hug, was all the forgiveness I needed. It would take time. A lot of time. But maybe, just maybe, we could heal. As I sat there with my children, holding them close, I heard the faintest whisper, barely audible, drifting in through the open window. You can't throw me away. But I ignored it. I had already started to take my life back. I can honestly say this has been the hottest summer I have ever experienced. Not just in Pittsburgh, where I live, but throughout the entire country. Sweltering heat to the point where even the most avid outdoor enthusiasts, such as myself, have had to shelter inside the comfort of air-conditioned homes or venture outside when one wouldn't expect to literally melt. A couple of nights ago, against my better judgment, I decided to go for an evening run in the heat. I consider myself a pretty experienced runner, and I thought I could handle a couple of miles even in this unbearable weather. I was particularly excited to get out because, apart from the reading of 88 degrees Fahrenheit on my phone, it was a beautiful summer night in western Pennsylvania. There was some cloud coverage, creating a spectacular array of vermilion and rust, bleeding into soft pinks and even light magenta. It had to be about 8 p.m. when I started off for what the locals call Sunset Park. The park is formerly known as Meyer Park, but due to its proximity to a small bluff with stunning views of the sunset, the nickname stuck. running through the back streets of my neighborhood. It's just over a mile from my house to the entrance of the park. I took it easy, as I had run a 5-mile loop around a nearby lake the day before. It took me about 10 minutes to make it to Sunset Park, the sky still glowing like something out of a painting as the light continued to fade. The park sits at the end of a quiet road, surrounded on all sides by dense woods. There's a small baseball field with a paved path that wraps around it. Typically, I do a couple of loops around the path before heading back the same way I came. But that night, something felt different. I noticed something I hadn't in the 3 years I'd been living in the neighborhood. Just before the chain that blocks the vehicle entrance to the park, there was a dead-end sign. It wasn't your typical dead-end sign. I remember that thought striking me as odd. There's another entrance to the park on the far side, connected by a gravel parking lot, so why the need for this sign here? I also couldn't recall ever seeing the Crime Watch sign nearby, with its ominous eye logo staring down at me. Maybe I had just been running on autopilot all those times before, but now the details stood out like red flags. Still, I pushed the unease aside and made my way into the park. I started my first loop around the baseball field. About halfway through, I realized something else was wrong. The park was empty, completely void of people. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, but even on the hottest evenings, I'd usually see a handful of runners, people walking their dogs, or kids biking along the paths. That night, there wasn't a soul in sight. The sinking feeling in my stomach grew heavier. I tried to shake it off, pushing my legs to keep their rhythm, but then I hit a wall that nearly knocked me out. Not a physical one, but something worse, an overwhelming, putrid smell. The stench of something rotting. It was so strong that I had to stop, bending over to catch my breath, trying not to gag. I looked around, confused and disoriented. No dead animals in sight, no dumpsters nearby, nothing to explain the scent. The air felt heavy with it, like it was sinking into my skin. Against my better judgment, I pushed on, wiping the sweat from my brow and telling myself it was just a dead raccoon somewhere in the woods. The second loop should have been easy, but the smell persisted, gnawing at my senses. And with each step, the world around me seemed to shift slightly. The sunset sky dimmed faster than it should have, the vibrant colors fading into a dull, oppressive gray. I finished the loop, but when I turned to leave the park, my heart skipped a beat. The path that should have led back to the main road seemed longer. The trees on either side seemed to close in, their branches tangled together like skeletal fingers. I stood there for a moment, blinking, wondering if I had gotten turned around somehow. But that was impossible. I'd run this route 100 times. A shiver ran down my spine. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep walking, telling myself I was just tired, that the heat was messing with my head. The trees seemed darker, their trunks twisting in unnatural shapes. I felt like I was being watched, like something was lurking just beyond my line of sight, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the dead-end sign. It was tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly shade of pale gray. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and blinking eyes that sent chills crawling up my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching me. My feet were glued to the pavement, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. But I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. Finally, I broke free of the paralysis and took a step back. The figure moved then, taking a step forward, its limbs moving unnaturally, like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. I turned and bolted, my legs burning with adrenaline, the sound of my heartbeat drowning out everything else. The path blurred as I sprinted back toward the park entrance, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't dare look back, not until I reached the chain that blocked the entrance to the park. When I finally turned, the figure was gone. I staggered to a stop, doubling over and gasping for air. The stench was gone, too, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of the cooling night air. The sky was still gray, but the oppressive feeling had lifted. Everything seemed normal again, as if the last few minutes had been nothing more than a fevered nightmare. But it wasn't over. As I caught my breath, something caught my eye. The dead end sign wasn't there anymore. It had vanished, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. I ran the entire way home without stopping. The next day, I went back to the park in the daylight, half convinced that I'd find the sign again, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But it wasn't there. No dead end sign, no crime watch sign, nothing. It was like they had never been there to begin with. I haven't gone back to Sunset Park since then. Something about that night was wrong, deeply, unshakably wrong. I've tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was the heat, the exhaustion, that maybe I was just seeing things in the twilight haze. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can still see that figure, standing at the edge of the woods, waiting, and I know I'll never go running there again. I gagged into my hand and pushed myself to keep jogging, when suddenly I noticed an odd-looking older couple walking ahead of me. They appeared to be in their late 50s or early 60s, both slightly overweight. The man was bald on the top of his head, with short white hair on the sides and back, and he had a long, straight mustache that gave him a walrus-like appearance. He was of average height, while his wife was quite short. She had straight hair that barely reached her ears and wore grandma glasses, the thick, oval-shaped kind. They looked like any regular couple out for an evening stroll, but their outfits caught my attention. They were both wearing short-sleeved raincoats without hoods. His was light blue, hers light pink. I'd never seen raincoats like those before, and the oddness of their attire lingered in my mind. They were just off to the side of the path, and I moved over to give them space before passing. I couldn't help but wonder if they smelled the same overwhelming stench that was practically suffocating me, what I assumed was some sort of dead animal in the woods nearby. As I got closer to them, I called out, "Something smells like death over here. Probably a dead raccoon or something." They didn't respond, but instead smiled at me, though their smiles did nothing to reassure me. In fact, they had the opposite effect, sending shivers down my spine. There was something deeply unsettling about the way they smiled. It wasn't warm or polite. It felt forced, unnatural. My goosebumps intensified as I tried to shake off the unease and jog past them. Just before we crossed paths, I glanced up to see if they were still smiling at me, but their expressions had changed. Now, both of them had a look of absolute terror on their faces. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were staring intently at something deeper in the woods. I followed their gaze, my eyes trailing toward one of the many winding trails that webbed out from behind the park, but I couldn't see what had captivated them. I pressed on, finishing my first loop around the baseball field, though I couldn't stop thinking about the couple. As I made my second lap, the oppressive stench of decay lingered around me, like I was carrying it with me. Each breath tasted of death. Normally, when something feels off, my fight-or-flight response kicks in, and I head straight for safety. But not that night. I was determined to get my full 2.5 miles in, even though every fiber of my being was screaming at me to turn around. As I rounded the first baseline, I was once again closing in on the couple. They were still standing there, and moving, by the trail's entrance, their eyes locked on something hidden in the woods. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to take a closer look at whatever had them frozen in fear. I slowed down near the spot where the path around the field met the entrance to the trails. The smell hit me full force as I stepped closer to the trail, like a wall of rot suffocating the air around me. I peeked into the woods, hoping to catch sight of whatever was causing their horrified expressions, but the thick undergrowth revealed nothing but shadows. The stench was unbearable. Whatever was causing it was definitely close by. I couldn't have taken my eyes off the couple for more than a few seconds, but when I turned back to the path, they were gone. Vanished. I stopped dead in my tracks, scanning the area. My heart pounded in my chest. They were just there. How could they have disappeared so quickly? I looked into the woods, hoping to see them ducking behind a tree or hidden in the brush, but there was no sign of them. No rustling leaves, no footsteps, nothing. There were only two possibilities that made sense to me. Either they were secretly Olympic sprinters in disguise, or something really strange was happening. I didn't waste any more time thinking about it. My sense of dread was creeping closer, and I didn't want to stick around to find out what had caused those terror-stricken looks on their faces. I picked up my pace, heading back toward the entrance of the park, eager to get out of there. As I jogged toward the exit, the smell of death finally started to fade, but the sense of unease stayed with me. The sun was rapidly setting now, casting long, eerie shadows over the park. I passed the dead-end sign again, but something else caught my attention this time. The sun. It was unlike any sunset I'd ever seen before. Normally, you can't stare directly at the sun, even as it dips below the horizon. But this evening, I could look straight at it without blinking. And it wasn't its usual golden or orange hue. It was blood red, a deep, ominous red that sent a chill through me, despite the oppressive heat. I had seen countless sunsets in my life, but never had I witnessed anything like this. The colors seemed to throb in the sky, casting a strange, crimson light over the trees and the path ahead. I quickened my pace, trying to shake the creeping sense of something being terribly wrong. But with every step, I couldn't help but feel like I wasn't alone, that something, or someone, was watching me, and I had a sinking feeling that this run was far from over. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My heart was racing in my chest, my breaths came in ragged gasps, and I was drenched in sweat. Every instinct in my body screamed that someone, or something, was following me. I glanced over my shoulder, fully expecting to see some kind of horrifying figure lurking in the growing darkness behind me. But all I saw was the fading light, the heat haze rising from the pavement. "Get it together, Alan. There's nothing behind you," I told myself, trying to steady my nerves. I forced myself to believe it, and for a brief moment, the knot in my stomach loosened. The anxiety subsided just enough for me to enjoy the last stretch of my run. The streetlights flickered on as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the neighborhood into a dim, orange-tinted maze of shadows. My house was just around the corner now, the end of my run finally in sight. But as I rounded the corner onto my quiet little dead-end street, my heart stopped. There, standing at the bottom of my driveway, was the same older couple. Holy shit! I gasped, my voice barely louder than a whisper. How could they be here? It didn't make any sense. I had left them back at the park, at least a good mile away. Yet here they were, standing motionless, staring at me. "What the hell are you doing here?" I yelled, my voice cracking from fear and confusion. I tried to pull myself together, telling myself that maybe they were lost or needed help. Maybe they had somehow recognized me and followed me here for a reason. I wanted there to be a logical explanation for their presence, but inside, I was unraveling fast. My hands were trembling as I cautiously approached them, my mind racing to find some sort of reasonable answer. They just smiled at me. The same cold, forced smiles that had sent chills down my spine earlier. Are you hurt? Do you need help? I asked, my voice shaky. How did you get here so fast? And how did you know where I lived? I didn't really want to hear the answers to those questions. In fact, I was terrified of what they might say. But I had to ask, if only to keep talking, to break the tense silence that hung between us. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. Their clothes, the light blue and pink raincoats, were shredded, torn apart like they had been through something horrific. And their faces, necks, and arms were covered in blood, the same deep, crimson red as the setting sun I had seen earlier. I couldn't take it any more. I sprinted past them, my legs moving on pure instinct. I reached the front door, slammed it shut behind me, and locked the deadbolt with shaking hands. As soon as I was inside, I pulled out my phone and opened the Ring doorbell app. There was no way I was going to look out the window and face them directly, but I had to know if they were still there. The live feed showed nothing. Just the empty driveway and the cars parked out front. No sign of the couple. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. I checked the other cameras around the house. Backyard, garden, garage, side yard, nothing. They were gone. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But then, curiosity got the better of me. Maybe I could catch them on the footage from earlier. Maybe the cameras could show me how they had gotten to my house. I rewound the front door footage by 10 minutes. I sped through it, expecting to see them walk up to the house, but there was nothing, no sign of them. When I finally saw myself come into view, pausing by the driveway, I could hear my voice speaking to them. But there was no one there. I was talking to thin air. My heart pounded in my ears. I watched the footage over and over, but the couple never appeared on the screen. No matter how many times I replayed it, the only person in the video was me, speaking to no one. Panic set in. I needed to tell my wife. She had to know what had happened. I ran upstairs, my feet barely touching the steps, and burst into our bedroom where she was already in bed. Hey babe, how was your run? Did you shower yet? She asked, her voice casual and sleepy. I tried to explain everything to her, stumbling over my words as I described the couple, the strange encounter, and the Ring footage. But she didn't believe me, not even for a second. You're an asshole, Alan. You know I hate scary stuff. I can't believe you'd go this far just to freak me out, she said, her voice tinged with irritation. I pleaded with her, showing her the footage, trying to make her understand. But she just grew more annoyed. Go show and make sure the doors are locked, she said, brushing me off. Frustrated and shaken, I checked the locks on the doors, then double-checked the windows, especially our daughter's. In the shower, all I could think about was the couple, their blood-stained clothes, their eerie smiles, the smell of death that still lingered in my throat. I tried to convince myself it was just the heat, that maybe I was dehydrated or exhausted from the run. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. The next morning, my wife was still upset with me. She thought I had gone overboard with my prank, and nothing I said seemed to convince her otherwise. I apologized, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a dark cloud. She reassured me that it must have been the heat, but I wasn't so sure, and to this day, I still don't know what I saw that night, or what followed me home as I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to shake off the remnants of last night's surreal encounter. I thought maybe a warm breakfast would help. I stepped into the kitchen, eager to toast some bread for our daughter before she woke up, and as I pushed the lever down on the toaster, a sudden crash echoed from the living room. "Alan!" My wife screamed, her voice laced with panic. "Get in here!" My heart raced as I rushed back into the living room, bracing myself for whatever was happening. When I arrived, I found my wife standing frozen, her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes glued to the television screen. My gaze followed hers, and I felt the blood drain from my face. On the screen was the top story of the hour, and the headline read, "Retired couple found mangled in local park." The world around me seemed to spin, and I could barely breathe as the reality of the situation sank in. Right above the news ticker, there was a picture of the couple I had seen the night before. They were wearing the same blue and pink rain shirts, but now their faces seemed twisted in expressions of horror, not the forced smiles I remembered. I staggered backward, gripping the back of the couch for support. "What? No, it can't be," I stammered, my mind racing with disbelief. "How can this be happening?" My wife turned to me, eyes wide. "What is it, Alan? Who are they?" "They were at the park last night. They were just there." I could barely get the words out, my voice trembling as I tried to explain. "They smiled at me, and then then they just disappeared." Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What are you talking about? They were covered in blood, Jennifer." I thought it was just a hallucination or something from the heat, but now. My voice trailed off as I felt the panic rise again, like a tide pulling me under. The news anchor continued speaking, detailing how the couple had been found in a secluded area of Maya Park, their bodies discovered near the trails I had run just the night before. I felt a chill creep over me as they reported that the couple had been brutally attacked, their bodies mangled beyond recognition. My stomach twisted at the thought of what might have happened, the memory of their strange smiles now forever etched in my mind. I turned back to the TV, desperately searching for answers. The report mentioned that local authorities were investigating, and they urged anyone with information to come forward. We should just stay inside today, avoid the park. It's too hot anyway, but I couldn't just forget about it. What if it's not just a random attack? What if those people were there for a reason? What if I saw something I shouldn't have? My voice was rising again, the fear twisting in my gut. "Maybe it was just a coincidence," she said, trying to soothe me, but her voice lacked conviction. "You know, this summer has been strange. It's messing with all our heads." Just then, the news switched to a report about the extreme heat affecting the region. As the anchor continued to speak about temperatures soaring and unusual weather patterns, I felt my phone vibrate on the counter. I glanced at it, my heart dropping it as I saw a notification from a local news app. "Witnesses report strange activity at Maya Park." With a sense of dread pooling in my stomach, I opened the article. It detailed sightings of unusual figures near the park, some claiming they'd seen shadowy figures lurking in the woods, or experienced an overwhelming sense of dread while running the trails. I felt the walls closing in on me, suffocating under the weight of the unfolding horror. "They can't be serious," I muttered, scanning the comments section filled with people sharing their own eerie experiences. Some spoke of the couple, recalling how they had seen them walking the trails, while others claimed to have felt watched, an unsettling presence that followed them as they ran or walked their dogs. Alan, we're not going to the park again. Let's just stay here and relax, my wife suggested, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. She was just as unsettled as I was. I can't just ignore this. I snapped, feeling the anxiety surge again. What if those people were trying to warn me? What if something worse is happening out there? Worse than what? She shot back, her patience wearing thin. They're dead, Alan. There's nothing we can do. As the news segment continued, they aired footage from the park taken earlier that morning, showing police tape blocking off areas and officers combing the woods. I felt a strange pull, a sense of urgency urging me to go there. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I had to find out more. I'm going to the park, I said firmly, my decision made. Are you out of your mind? Jennifer exclaimed, her eyes wide with disbelief. You can't. It's too dangerous. I need to know, I replied, the fear mixing with determination. I need to understand what happened. Before she could protest further, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The heat pressed against me as I stepped outside, but I was fueled by a need for answers, the nagging questions swirling in my mind. What was really happening at Maya Park? What had I seen that night? And who, or what, had been following me home? As I drove toward the park, the reality of the situation hit me hard. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking straight into something far beyond my comprehension. But I had to know. I had to face whatever awaited me in the shadows. This happened about 5 years ago, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched every night. It all started on a regular Thursday evening in late November. I had just moved into a new apartment on the outskirts of town, a quaint little place with more character than I could have ever hoped for. Or so I thought. The building was old, probably from the early 1900s, with a kind of eerie charm that had initially drawn me in. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Thompson, seemed nice enough. He had a strange, overly friendly demeanor, but I figured he was just trying to make sure I felt comfortable. Maybe he was lonely. I lived on the 3rd floor, and my only neighbor on that level was a woman named Alice. I rarely saw her, but whenever I did, she always looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder and hurrying back to her apartment without a word. One night, as I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I suddenly heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper. Help me ... double quotes. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. I strained my ears to hear, but there was only silence. I dismissed it as my imagination and tried to relax. But just as I was drifting off again, I heard it once more, this time a little louder. Please ... Help me ... double quotes. I shot up in bed, wide awake. The voice was coming from the corner of my room. My heart raced as I quickly flicked on the bedside lamp. The corner was empty, just shadows from the wardrobe. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just the old pipes or a draft. But then I heard it again, even more desperate this time. He's coming for me ... please ... I jumped out of bed, now completely terrified. I searched the room, but it was empty. Shaken, I decided to leave my apartment and take a walk to clear my head. As I stepped into the dimly lit hallway, I noticed Alice's door was slightly ajar. I could hear faint sobbing coming from inside. I hesitated, then knocked gently on her door. Alice, are you okay? The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a long, eerie silence. Then, in a hoarse whisper, she said, "He's watching you too, isn't he?" A chill ran down my spine. Who's watching me? Slowly, she peered out from behind the door. Her eyes were wide with fear. The man in the corner. He watches us. He waits for us to fall asleep ... and then he takes us. I stepped back, feeling my stomach drop. Alice, that's not funny. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm not joking. He got the last tenant, too. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't know how to respond, so I mumbled something unintelligible and hurried back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. Sleep was impossible that night. I kept staring at the corner, half expecting something to move in the darkness. The next morning, I went to speak with Mr. Thompson, telling him about Alice's strange behavior and the voice I heard. He just chuckled and said, "Alice has always had a vivid imagination. You're probably just tired from the move." I wanted to believe him, but the sense of dread lingered. That night, I stayed up, refusing to let sleep take me. Around 3 a.m., just when the silence in the apartment was at its thickest, I felt it. A cold, unnatural breeze, despite the windows being closed. Then I saw something, a shadow, darker than the rest, stirring in the corner of my room. It began to stretch and grow, slowly forming the silhouette of a man. My breath caught in my throat as his figure became clearer. His eyes were hollow, his face twisted into a hideous, grotesque grin. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move, paralyzed with fear. I watched as he stepped closer, his hand reaching out for me. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating. Just as his fingers were inches from my face, a loud banging echoed through my apartment. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the door, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. Alice was standing there, pale and shaking. "Did you see him?" she whispered. I nodded, my voice stuck in my throat. "We have to leave," she said, her voice urgent. Now, we packed our bags and fled the building that night, leaving everything behind. I moved back in with my parents and never returned. I later found out that my apartment, and several others in that building, had a history of tenants disappearing without a trace. To this day, I still see him sometimes. Just for a second, out of the corner of my eye, a dark shadow in the corner of the room, watching, waiting. And I know he's still there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Every night, I sleep with the lights on, hoping it will keep him away. But deep down, I know the man in the corner is still watching ... and one day, he might come for me too. I never believed in the supernatural. My great-aunt's mirror, a grand, ornate piece with intricate gold framing, seemed like a curious antique more than a harbinger of horror. She left it to me in her will, and though it didn't fit with my modern decor, I hung it in the hallway, thinking it might add a touch of vintage elegance. At first, everything seemed normal. I'd catch glimpses of myself in the mirror as I passed by, occasionally noticing how the reflection seemed unusually vivid. But then, the disturbances started. A few weeks ago, I was woken by an unsettling scratching noise coming from the hallway. It was faint at first, almost like the sound of something small moving against the wall. I ignored it, thinking it might be a mouse. But the noise grew louder each night, accompanied by whispers that I couldn't quite make out. One night, I couldn't sleep. I got up to investigate and noticed something alarming. Faint smudges and handprints on the surface of the mirror, as if someone had been pressing against it from the other side. I tried to clean them, but they wouldn't budge. It was as if the marks were etched into the glass. That's when things took a horrifying turn. The mirror, which had previously reflected the hallway, now displayed a dark, foreboding corridor that didn't exist in my apartment. The walls were draped in shadows, and a door at the end of the corridor was slightly ajar, with a dim, flickering light coming from beyond it. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light. But every time I looked back, the corridor remained, and the door creaked open wider, revealing glimpses of a dark, shifting shape. It was as if something was moving just beyond the threshold, watching me. My heart raced, and I reached out to touch the mirror. As soon as my fingers made contact, the air grew frigid. A cold, clammy sensation enveloped my hand, and I felt a powerful force pulling at me from the other side. It was like icy fingers wrapping around my wrist, trying to drag me through the glass. I yanked my hand away and stumbled back, but the sensation didn't fade. Shadows in the mirror twisted and writhed, and the whispers grew louder, now distinctly angry, as if they were screaming for release. I saw fleeting images of distorted faces and grasping hands pressing against the mirror, desperately trying to break free. Since that night, the mirror has become a source of constant dread. I've noticed other oddities, things being out of place, inexplicable cold spots in my apartment, and objects moving on their own. The whispers and scratching sounds are now a nightly occurrence, and sometimes, when I glance at the mirror, I see shadowy figures watching me from the other side. I tried covering the mirror with a cloth, but it didn't help. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to seep through the fabric. I even tried to move it, but it felt unnaturally heavy and resisted every attempt. Now, I'm too afraid to approach it. I've considered destroying it, but something in me fears what might happen if I do. Whatever is trapped in that mirror feels malevolent and hungry. It's as if the mirror has become a gateway, and I'm terrified of what might come through if I provoke it. I'm left with a constant sense of dread, knowing that whatever is behind that glass is not just watching me, it's waiting for a chance to get out. It was a typical Friday night in my small hometown. A group of us, Mark, Lisa, Jake, Sarah, and I, had gathered at Mark's house, looking for something to do. As usual, Mark, always the thrill-seeker, wanted an adventure. He had been going on about the old tunnel just outside of town, a place none of us had ever dared to visit. The tunnel wasn't on any maps and wasn't part of any local history lesson, but it was famous in town for one reason. Everyone believed it was cursed. You guys scared or something? Mark taunted, as we sat around his living room. It's just an old tunnel, Jake added, trying to sound brave. But I could see the doubt in his eyes, and I knew he didn't really want to go. Still, Mark egged us on, and before we knew it, we found ourselves agreeing to the dare. We all packed our flashlights, put on our jackets, and made our way into the woods. The air was cold, the kind that bites through layers of clothing, and an unsettling fog crept in as we ventured further from town. I wasn't superstitious, but something about that night felt wrong from the start. After about 20 minutes of walking through the trees, Mark stopped. "Here it is," he said, pushing aside a thick cluster of bushes. There, hidden away from the world, was the entrance to the tunnel. It looked ancient, its arched stone mouth covered in moss and ivy. There was no door, no markings. It was just a gaping black hole leading into the earth. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. Mark didn't hesitate. "Last one in's a coward," he said, grinning, before ducking into the tunnel. Jake followed quickly, with Lisa and Sarah right behind. I stood there for a moment, staring into the darkness, feeling an overwhelming urge to turn back. But I didn't want to be the only one left behind, so I swallowed my fear and crawled in. Inside, the air was damp and musty, and our footsteps echoed against the stone walls. The light from our flashlights barely penetrated the gloom, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The further we went, the colder it got. It felt like we were descending into another world entirely, leaving behind everything familiar. "This thing goes on forever," Lisa whispered nervously after what felt like an hour of walking. Mark, ever the adventurer, just shrugged. "Maybe it's a secret passage," he said with a smirk. "Think about it. What if it leads to some treasure or something? Or maybe it's just an old tunnel that's falling apart," Sarah muttered, not amused. That's when we heard it, the whisper. At first, it was so faint I thought I imagined it. A soft, almost musical voice that drifted through the cold air. "Do you hear that?" Jake asked, his voice tight with fear. We all stopped, listening intently. The whisper came again, louder this time, though none of us could make out the words. "Probably just the wind," Mark said dismissively. But his bravado had slipped, and I could tell he was nervous too. We kept moving, though every step felt heavier, as if the tunnel itself didn't want us to leave. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. The voices sounded like they were right behind us, then in front of us, then all around us. "I don't like this," Lisa said, stopping in her tracks. We should turn back, but before anyone could agree or argue, the tunnel seemed to shift. The walls, once solid and unchanging, began to curve and twist in impossible ways. It was as if the tunnel had come alive, bending reality around us. "What the hell is going on?" Jake shouted, swinging his flashlight wildly. No one had an answer. Panic set in. We tried to turn back, but every time we retraced our steps, we ended up deeper in the tunnel. It was a maze now, endless and confusing, with no sense of direction. That's when Sarah screamed. We spun around, but she was gone. 1 minute she had been right behind me, and the next she had vanished into the shadows. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice echoing off the stone walls. But there was no response, just more of those chilling whispers. "She couldn't have just disappeared," Lisa whispered, her face pale. "We have to find her. But how?" The tunnel didn't make any sense anymore. It felt like we were walking in circles, but every corner we turned led us somewhere new. The walls seemed to pulse, and the whispers turned into low, mocking laughter. "Sarah!" Jake called out, running ahead, but soon he, too, was swallowed by the darkness. His voice trailed off into nothingness, and just like that, he was gone. Now it was just Mark, Lisa, and me, huddled together, trying to figure out what was happening. Mark, who had been so brave before, was now pale and trembling. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "It's just a tunnel. It's just a tunnel." But it wasn't. We all knew that now. The darkness closed in around us. We could no longer tell how much time had passed. The only sound was the steady drip of water and those infernal whispers. The ground seemed to shake beneath us as if the tunnel itself was alive. "Please," Lisa begged, tears streaming down her face. "Let's just go back." Mark nodded, but when we tried to retrace our steps again, we were met with solid stone. The entrance, the way we had come, it was gone. In its place was a cold, damp wall that stretched infinitely in both directions. "This isn't happening," I muttered to myself, my heart pounding in my chest. But it was happening. And then the figure appeared. It was just a shadow at first, barely visible at the edge of our flashlight beams. But slowly it took shape, a tall, dark figure standing at the far end of the tunnel, watching us. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, an ominous silhouette against the blackness. Lisa screamed and ran. I tried to grab her, but she slipped through my fingers and disappeared into the darkness. A moment later, her scream was cut short. Now it was just Mark and me. The figure was still there, getting closer. I could feel its presence, cold and suffocating, like the air itself was turning solid. "We're not getting out, are we?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. I shook my head, too terrified to speak. The figure was inches away now, its form barely visible in the flickering light. I closed my eyes, expecting the worst. When I opened them, I was standing outside. The tunnel was gone, the entrance hidden behind the same bushes where we'd started. It was morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. I was alone. Mark, Lisa, Jake, and Sarah were never seen again. I don't know how I made it out, or why I was the only one who did. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers. And I know that if I go back, I'll never return. I tried to tell them it was a mistake to reopen the camp. I told them what I saw all those years ago, but of course, they didn't believe me then. Why would they now? Camp Soleil, I've changed the name for obvious reasons, was a place for troubled rich kids. You know, the kind of camp where your kid sets the neighbor's shed on fire and, instead of juvie, you send them away to a nature retreat to become model citizens. Except that's all a facade, the truth. The kids at Camp Soleil were worked to the bone. They scrubbed floors with toothbrushes, ran until they could barely stand, and were made so miserable they didn't have the energy to rebel. The camp was off the radar, known only to locals and shared by word of mouth among the wealthy and connected. Occasionally, they accepted local kids. That's how I ended up there, 11 years ago. I wasn't a rich kid. Far from it. My parents never really cared about me. They just tolerated me. But when I started acting out, smashing windows, stealing from the corner store, and generally being a pain in the ass, my father pulled some strings with the local police chief. Instead of juvie, I got a vacation to Camp Soleil. My parents were thrilled to be rid of me. We were dirt poor, and how my mom managed to secure me a spot at a place like Soleil, I never knew, and honestly, I didn't want to know. I thought I'd be glad to get away from home. I thought anything would be better than listening to the nightly fights and screams. But soon, I found myself wishing I were back there. As soon as the bus stopped at camp, we were forced to lug all our belongings for what seemed like miles up a dirt trail. Then we were sorted into cabins and handed sponges and toothbrushes to scrub down the dorms and showers. That was my first taste of Camp Soleil. Dinner that night was when I met Devon. He wasn't like the others. His parents were in the entertainment business, producers, writers, I can't remember. He had no business being at a place like this. He was funny, kind, the type of kid who didn't seem like he belonged anywhere near a camp for troubled youth. Devon's parents had pretty much ignored him his whole life. He was raised by his nanny, Susie, whom he adored. The only reason he was at Camp Soleil was because his parents had been convinced by their wealthy friends that it would toughen him up. I hope they rot in hell for it. Camp life was brutal. Run, clean, cook, eat, sleep, repeat. But Saturdays were different. Saturdays were free time, or one chance to escape the monotony. Devon and I were inseparable, and we'd spend our Saturdays exploring the woods around the camp. That's when we started noticing things. Strange things. At first, we heard voices. Low, murmuring whispers that always seemed to be just out of sight. Sometimes, we found odd structures in the trees, bones and sticks arranged like ornaments. We thought it was just other kids messing with us, a prank to scare the new arrivals. But it was and single quotes T. Everything changed the night Devon died. It was a Saturday like any other, and we were out in the woods, hearing those faint voices again. But this time, we decided to play along. Devon had this wild idea. If there were pranksters out there, we'd turn the tables on them. So, we followed the whispers deeper into the forest. The voices were so faint we couldn't make out what they were saying, but they grew louder the further we went. Then we reached a clearing. That's when everything went wrong. The voices suddenly surrounded us. They weren't faint anymore. They were close, so close that it felt like they were whispering right into our ears. Devon panicked. He wanted to run. I should have listened to him. But I was stupid and arrogant. I thought we could handle whatever it was, probably just some rich kids trying to scare us. I convinced myself that Devon and I could take them. But then the whispers changed. "Come here, little one," they said, the words dragging through the air like a cold breath on my neck. "Feed the lost one. Break them." There were other phrases too, things I can't even remember now. But what I do remember was the sudden, gut-wrenching terror that washed over me. That's when we heard it, the sound of something crashing through the woods toward us. I finally listened to Devon. We ran. We sprinted through the trees, our feet pounding the ground as branches whipped at our faces and arms. Whatever was chasing us wasn't far behind. I could hear its footsteps, heavy and fast, tearing through the underbrush. Devon was ahead of me, and I could hear him breathing hard, panic taking over. I was barely keeping up. We didn't stop until we reached camp, but by then, it was too late. We made it back to our cabin, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. Devon looked pale, his eyes wide with fear. "What the hell was that?" he asked, but I didn't have an answer. I wanted to tell him it was all a bad dream, a figment of our imagination. But I knew it wasn't. That night, Devon didn't make it. Sometime between the hours of midnight and dawn, he disappeared. The counselors said he must have run away. They tried to convince me it was Devon's fault, that he couldn't handle the pressure, or the camp, or whatever excuse they came up with. But I knew better. Devon had been taken by whatever was out there in those woods. The camp shut down soon after. Too many rumors, too much bad press. But now, they've reopened it, thinking enough time has passed. Thinking it's all forgotten. I tried to tell them it was a mistake, but no one listens. Not then, not now. We sprinted through the woods, but now the voices were following us, growing louder with every step. They sounded like my parents, voices full of disdain, telling me I was a mistake, that they hated me. I started to cry. Deep down, I always knew they felt that way, but hearing it out loud. It shattered me. Suddenly, Devon grabbed my arm. "Climb the tree," he urged. My legs felt like jelly, but I tried to climb. Devon was behind me, pushing me to go faster, but I couldn't. My mind was a mess, and I was sobbing uncontrollably. I was weak. I was a coward. I hated myself in that moment. The voices were getting closer, whispering, taunting, and it was Devon who finally made the choice to jump down. "Keep climbing," he yelled before running off and hiding beneath a fallen tree. I kept going, inching my way up until I was just high enough to hide in the leaves. Then everything went quiet. I clung to that tree for what must have been 30 minutes, silently crying, my chest heaving with shallow breaths. I could barely think, barely breathe. From my perch, I scanned the ground, looking for whatever had been chasing us, but saw nothing. Devon hadn't moved from his hiding spot either. The only sound was the distant lapping of water from the lake, which I now realized was only a few minutes' walk from the cabins. I tried to shout down to Devon, "We need to go." Now my voice was hoarse, but he heard me. Slowly, cautiously, he crawled out from under the tree. I began to climb down too, shaking all over but trying to stay quiet. Then I froze. "Devon," a woman's voice called out softly. Devon's eyes went wide. "Susie, is that you?" He called back, his voice trembling. My heart stopped. I tried to tell him to stay quiet, to hide again, but it was too late. The voice was getting louder. "Devon, honey, stay where you are. I've come to take you home. They said you were a lost one, but I've found you. I have a home for you now." Tears welled up in Devon's eyes as he stood there, frozen in place. There was something chasing us. I was so scared. "I just want to go home," he cried out. I should have stopped him. I should have yelled at him to run, grabbed him, anything. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, not just by fear, but by the strange, unsettling beauty of the voice that was calling him. Then it emerged from the woods. It wasn't Susie. What came out of the forest was tall, 7 feet at least, its body slender and malformed. It was a grotesque fusion of human, animal, and something else altogether. Parts of its body were covered in slick, gray skin, while other sections had patches of matted fur or long strands of human-like hair. Its limbs were unnaturally long, one arm ending in a stump, the other in a large, clawed hand. Its head sprouted antlers like a deer, but also the thick, curling horns of a bull. It was horrifying, and yet there was something about it that was almost mesmerizing. Devon didn't run. He smiled. "I missed you so much, Susie," he said as he rushed toward the creature with open arms. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but I couldn't. I was rooted to that spot in the tree, forced to watch. The creature's beautiful voice transformed, becoming a shrill, nails on chalkboard rasp as it screeched, "Welcome home, lost one." In one fluid motion, it lifted Devon into the air like he weighed nothing at all. Before I could even blink, it ripped him in half, his torso separated from his legs as easily as if it was snapping a twig. His blood sprayed the ground, and the creature lifted what remained of him to its grotesque, gaping mouth. I screamed. Then I fell. I don't remember hitting the ground. I don't remember how long I was out. But when I woke up, the counselors were standing over me, saying I had fallen and hit my head. They said Devon must have gotten lost in the woods during the chaos, and they couldn't find him. I tried to tell them what I saw. I told them we were by the lake, that I wasn't lost, that I couldn't have fallen if I hadn't been running from something. But no one listened. They wouldn't even acknowledge Devon's disappearance beyond vague reassurances that they were looking into it. Devon's parents were devastated. Well, sort of. They cared just enough to get the camp shut down, but not enough to have the story go public. I did my own research after that. I found out that kids had been going missing around that area for decades, long before Camp Soleil even existed. The number of disappearances spiked after the camp opened and dropped again after it closed. Someone's covering this up. I'm sure of it, but not anymore. This time, I'm going back to the camp. Tonight. Devon, I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to save you. But this time, I'm going to finish what we started. Tonight, as you always said, the hunter becomes the hunted. I have been living in rural Ohio for about the last year. Since moving in with my husband, I have become what some would call the crazy cat lady of our neighborhood. It's not that I have a lot of cats, it's that I feed and befriend every stray I come across. Living in the country means you are surrounded by wildlife. Deer, mice, skunks, rats, bats, raccoons, possums and, you guessed it, cats. Humans are terrible creatures sometimes. They have a habit of taking in animals they can't handle, then quickly changing their minds when things get too hard. When that happens in the city, most people drop their new pets off at a local shelter. Here in the country, they just throw them outside. If those unloved fur balls aren't fixed, they team up and make more of themselves. If I had to guess, our small town alone has about 50 strays. I would guess I have made friends with around 15 of them in the past year. I leave food on my front and back porch for them every night. I brush the more friendly ones, and I've even kidnapped a few for a day to take them in for vaccines. I can't adopt them all, but I try to make life a little less hard for all these guys. Lately, something strange has been happening though. I have a tendency to stay up late. My husband started working the night shift about a year ago, and it's hard to get used to sleeping in an empty bed. Since we moved for his job, I have developed a case of separation insomnia. I only really sleep well on his days off. I work the average 7 to 3 shift. When I get home, I try to clean the house, tend to our pets indoor and outdoor, and make dinner or breakfast for him to eat before work. During this time, my husband Jake is fast asleep. He sleeps just fine without me. Lucky bastard. Sometimes I nap with him after I make dinner, and he wakes up around 9 p.m. to get ready for work. Once he's gone, I tend to just turn on the TV and game to pass the time until I have to get myself ready for work. Jake and I pass like ships in the night. It's hard to manage sometimes, but we are working toward buying the house we are currently renting. After this past week though, I hope he can be convinced to relocate. About 6 days ago, I was in the living room watching a show about hoarding, when I heard something big dragging across our porch. It was around 11 p.m., and Jake had only been at work for an hour at this point. Sounds on our porch weren't unusual, since I had a cat buffet out there. But whatever made this sound, it was bigger than a cat. Its weight was closer to that of a dog, or even a person. I paused the television and waited in the silence for it to happen again. My dog Bella slept soundly at my feet. Nothing happened. Our front door leads straight into our living room. There are 2 huge windows that never seem to be completely covered by the curtains, and our couch sits right below those windows. I try to arrange the curtains so that the part of the window that isn't covered is farthest away from my face. If I'm laying on the couch, it's nearest to my feet. I peeked out one of the windows onto the porch and saw absolutely nothing there. So I simply pressed play and kept watching my show. When the sun came up, nothing was unusual, except that the cat food was completely untouched. The bowl on the back porch was empty as expected. Nothing happened for a few days. Honestly, I had kind of forgotten about the sound until 2 nights ago. This time, the dragging happened around 2 a.m. I was actually upstairs in our bedroom when I heard it. Our bedroom window is right above the porch, and I was shocked to realize I could hear this sound all the way upstairs. It was far too heavy to be a cat. I muted the TV and listened, slightly nervous. My dog was in the bed next to me listening as well, The dragging continued. It was like someone was dragging their shoes across the wooden porch. Bella started to growl. It was a low, throaty sound I had never heard her make before. The fact that my dog was upset by this made me nervous. I couldn't call Jake until he went on break at 3 a.m. Not knowing what else to really do, I got up from the bed and walked quietly to the window. I opened it about a finger's width and listened for the dragging. Meow. The sound of a cat almost had me laughing with relief. Of course, it wasn't a person. Bella had never once growled at a cat on our porch before, but maybe it was because we were all the way upstairs. I wondered if it was Toby. He was an orange tabby that was heavier than all the rest of the strays. He had a few other houses on the street feeding him. The dragging continued. Even Toby didn't seem to be that heavy for almost 15 minutes. Something dragged across my porch from one end to the other repetitively. Then it stopped completely. Bella stopped growling and went back to sleep, and I waited nervously to call Jake. He thought it was Toby. "You're tired," he told me. "You're up at night watching TV by yourself. Your imagination is running away from you." That didn't explain why Bella was upset, but maybe Jake was right. For all I knew, there was a stray cat I didn't know yet putzing around on our porch. The next morning, the cat food bowl was toppled over. None of the food inside was eaten. This all leads me to what happened last night. Just a few hours ago, Jake was off work Monday. We spent the night enjoying each other's company, watching movies on the couch. Neither of us heard anything strange. I went to work Tuesday morning on basically no sleep at all. I came home to do my usual routine and threw Jake's work uniform into the laundry. While I waited for it to dry, I made the mistake of falling asleep on the couch. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of a cat meowing. Moonlight was streaming through the crack where the curtains didn't fully cover the window by my feet. The television had turned itself off because it was on a set timer. Jake must have gotten ready and left for work without waking me up. Bella lay on the floor beside the couch, and again, she was growling. Meow, meow. Bella growled louder at the sound of it. Her hackles were raised, and I could tell she was working her way up to a bark. The dragging again. That same thing lumbered across the porch and over to the window. I could see the shape of it blocking out the light where the curtain didn't cover. In that moment, I was sure of two things. The first was that there was not a cat on my porch at all. The second was that whatever was out there was looking into my living room. Meow. This was a damn near perfect cat impression. If I couldn't see the huge, horrifying human-shaped shadow at my window, I might have even believed it. My heart pounded out of my chest. I couldn't move. Bella jumped to her feet, ran to the side of the window where the shadow loomed, and let out one good ferocious bark. Then she seemed to really see whoever was at the window. She began to tremble and whimper. Meow, the shadow said to her. I was too frightened to move. My dog was whining at my feet, and I couldn't tell if this weirdo on my porch could see me laying there or not. After a few moments of silence, a bark resounded through the room. At first, I thought Bella had found her voice again, but she was still shaking at my feet. No sound had come from her mouth. The shadow at the window was mimicking her. I felt tears start to stream down my face. All I could think about was one question. Had Jake locked the door before he left for work? I don't know how long I lay there, crying in silence and fear, listening to this shadowy person meow and bark. When the sun came up around 5 a.m., the shadow shifted. It seemed to slowly drag itself away from the window and off my porch. It's now 6 a.m. as I write this. Bella and I are still shaking. Jake should be getting off work soon. When he gets here, I'm telling him I want to move. This is an update. Part 1 can be read here. When Jake came home yesterday morning, he asked me why the porch was covered in cat food. I had no idea what he meant, so I nervously opened the front door and looked. The entire bowl was flipped over, and bits of crushed cat food were spread across the entirety of our porch. It looked like someone had dumped the bowl out and proceeded to stomp all the food into dusty bits. The cat food on the back porch was completely untouched. I tried to explain everything that had happened while Jake was gone. I guess the idea of a meowing monster tormenting his wife sat very strangely with him, so he pulled up our Ring camera and tried to review the footage taken at around 2 a.m. I was honestly too afraid to watch it. I just waited in silence for him to finish. He definitely looked disturbed by what he saw, but he was clearly not convinced it was a monster. Some teenager must be pulling a messed up prank on us, he decided. You should move both cat food bowls to the back porch from now on. I argued the idea. What would moving the food do about this dude sitting at our window, meowing like a crazy person? I told him I wanted to leave the house altogether. Jake sighed. You know we can't move right now. All of our money is tied up in this place, and the lease we signed isn't up for another 6 months. Forget the lease, I said indignantly. I want to feel safe in my living room without someone, or something, looking into it. We argued for a bit longer than I want to admit before I had to give up. In the end, he was right. We have nowhere else to go so soon. The nearest hotel is a good hour-and-a-half drive from Jake's machinist job. If I wanted to move that badly, he agreed we would look into places and move once our lease was up. In the meantime, he promised to get new living room curtains and upgrade us to a Ring doorbell instead of the one we have just sitting inside our living room. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful. I went to work and came home with new curtains. I picked a dark brown shade that let in basically no light. It was a terrible choice for a living room, but it would block out any chance of seeing a shadow at night. I got home to find Bella had not touched her food all day. She was curled up in a pile of clothes in our laundry room, sleeping. I tried to let her outside to go party, and she refused to go out until I went out there with her. While we were out, Toby the orange tabby stopped by for a bite and rubbed on Bella's leg. She seemed to enjoy his affection until he meowed up at her. Then Bella growled at him. That shocked both Toby and me. Bella never growled at Toby before. She has never growled at any cat. Bella loves cats. I took her inside, and she went back to sleep in the laundry room again. I also decided to stop sitting in the living room at night. Before Jake left for work, I gathered everything I would need for food and entertainment before basically locking myself in our room until Jake got home. Bella came with me, of course. I turned the TV up as loud as I could reasonably put it, hoping I would drown out any noise if my night visitor decided to come back. The night passed without incident, until around 3 a.m. I was halfway through a TV show when Bella, who had been lying beside me, shot up, growling low and fierce. My heart skipped a beat. The memory of that shadowy figure loomed large in my mind. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. Just as I was about to relax, a soft, deliberate dragging noise echoed from the front of the house. It was the sound I dreaded. It started slow, like something was being scraped across the wooden porch again, but this time it was louder, closer. Bella whimpered, her hackles raised, and I felt paralyzed. I stared at the closed bedroom door, afraid that whatever was out there would find its way inside. Meow. That sick, perfect cat impression came from outside, as if something was taunting us. I gripped my phone. debating whether to call Jake or wait for him to come home and his break. But the dragging noise grew louder, closer to the front door. Then there was a distinct tap on the window of our bedroom, right where the curtain didn't fully cover it. My heart stopped. Bella stood rigid, her growl deepening into something primal. Then another meow, followed by a chilling mimic of Bella's earlier growl. I couldn't take it any more. I dialed Jake, my hands trembling as I pressed the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice, and then he answered, groggy from being half asleep on his break. "There's someone at the house," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's not human, Jake. It's back, and it's mimicking Bella, again." Jake sounded fully awake now. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "Lock the door. Stay in the room. Don't open it for anything." I hung up, praying that he'd get here fast. The dragging stopped abruptly, and for a brief moment there was silence. Then a sound that sent cold chills down my spine, a deep, slow scratching against the door to our bedroom. Bella balked, a single frantic yelp, then backed away from the door, trembling. The scratching continued, long and deliberate. Like whatever was out there wanted me to know it was waiting. It was once again around to aim when I heard a faint dragging sound coming from below. Like I said before, my bedroom is right above the porch. Bella woke up from her comfortable sleep at my side and started shaking. I turned up the TV and hoped I could just wait it out. I could not. After a few minutes, there was a loud bang. Bella whimpered. I reminded myself of what Jake said. It was just some kid playing a prank. I wasn't sure I believed his idea though. Bang, 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 bang. The noises grew louder. It sounded almost like someone was smacking their hands on the side of my house in frustration. Like the stranger could hear my TV drowning out their intrusion, and that made them angry. I turned the volume louder. Bang, bang. The sound slapped at the old paneling of my house, only getting louder with the TV volume. The force of the hits was shaking my walls. I started to fear this person would try to break into the house if I didn't respond to them. I reluctantly muted my television and crept toward the window. Once again, I only opened it about a finger's width. "Go away." I tried to sound braver than I felt. My dog shook behind me so hard it reminded me of how she acted on the 4th of July when fireworks went off. There was an eerie silence that followed my demand. I wondered if I had surprised the person by actually speaking to them. All I did was make things worse. "Go away." The voice that repeated me from outside almost made me piss my pants. It sounded garbled and wet, like someone was talking with a mouthful of water. "Go away, go away, go away, go away, go away." Each time it repeated my words, it sounded more like my voice. Like it was practicing talking like me. The banging started up again. "Ban. Go away," it mocked. "Bang, bang. Go. Bang, bang, bang." Owaya. A dragging sound. More dragging. The sound dragged its way along the outside of my house, back and forth until it stopped directly below my window. I wanted to crawl back to the bed and hide myself under the covers like a child. Isn't that always the best way to hide from monsters? Bang, 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 bang. The sound was rapidly climbing its way up the side of my house, getting louder as it approached. I managed to let go of the window and shove the curtain back in place just before I heard something slap onto the glass. I fell on my back, staring at the curtain in shock and horror. From the other side of the window, I heard its voice. Meow. I scrambled up from the floor and ran, no, I bolted, down the hallway and into the bathroom. Bella ran almost ahead of me as I went. I slammed the door behind us and locked it. I didn't care that I had left my phone in the bed. All I cared about was that this bathroom had a lock and no windows. Bella and I stayed in that bathroom with the lights on all night long until Jake got home. He wanted to know why I didn't answer when he called me around 3 a.m. on his break. Jake doesn't seem to really believe what I told him. He's treating me like I had some kind of nightmare while he was gone at work. But I know what happened. Something crawled up the side of my house last night and tried to look in at me. Something that slapped at my windows and spoke in my voice. I wasn't asleep, and it wasn't a dream. I know this for a fact. Because in the light of day, I went back into that horrible bedroom and looked at that window. I saw the greasy proof that coated the outside of the glass. There's a handprint on it. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I'd get spooked by a good horror movie or jump at an unexpected noise in the dark, but I always chalked it up to an overactive imagination. That changed last summer when I took a job that led me to the old Hartley house at the end of Willow Street. Now, I'm not sure what I believe anymore, but I know one thing for certain: evil exists, and sometimes it finds a home in the most unexpected places. It started innocently enough. I'm a 23-year-old architecture student, and I was thrilled to land a summer internship with a local historical preservation society. My first major assignment was to survey and document the Hartley House, a decrepit Victorian mansion that had stood abandoned for decades. The plan was to assess its condition and determine if restoration was feasible. The house had a reputation, of course. Every small town has that one creepy old building that's the subject of endless rumors and dares. Kids would challenge each other to spend the night there, but no one ever did. Not really. There were whispers about the Hartley family, how they'd all died mysteriously over a century ago, how the house had stood empty ever since. But I didn't put much stock in ghost stories and urban legends. My first visit to the house was on a sweltering July afternoon. The taxi dropped me off at the end of the overgrown driveway, and I remember thinking the place looked like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of weathered brick and warped wood, with a tower on one side and a wraparound porch thick with vines. Most of the windows were boarded up, but I could see hints of stained glass behind the boards on the upper floors. As I approached the front door, key in hand, I felt a strange reluctance. It was like walking through molasses, each step harder than the last. I chalked it up to nerves and the oppressive heat. When I finally reached the porch, the wood creaked ominously under my feet. The key stuck in the lock at first, but with a bit of jiggling, it turned. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through the entire house. The smell hit me first, musty and thick, with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of overripe fruit. I stepped inside, my shoes leaving prints in the thick layer of dust on the floor. The entry hall was grand, even in its state of decay. A sweeping staircase dominated the space, its once elegant banister now warped and splintered. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips, revealing glimpses of bare plaster beneath. To my left and right, open doorways led to what I assumed were the parlor and dining room. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone to start taking pictures for my report. The flash illuminated the room in short, bright bursts, making the house seem even more desolate. Every snap of the shutter echoed unnaturally, as though the house was amplifying the sound. I tried to push down the growing unease in my chest. I had a job to do. Over the next few hours, I moved through the rooms, documenting everything from the cracked ceiling to the crumbling fireplace. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, though. The house seemed to breathe, creaking and groaning with every step I took. Shadows played tricks on my eyes, shifting in the corners of rooms as if something was watching me just out of sight. By late afternoon, I decided to call it a day. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. But as I was packing up, something strange happened. I was in the kitchen, kneeling down to photograph the old stove when I heard it, the soft, rhythmic tapping. I paused, my heart thudding in my chest. Tap, tap, tap. I stood up, my eyes scanning the room. The sound was coming from above me, like footsteps on the second floor. I told myself it was just the house settling, but a cold sweat had already broken out across my skin. I ignored it. I had to. I wasn't about to let some creaky old house freak me out. I closed my camera case and slung my bag over my shoulder, ready to leave. That's when I heard it again, this time louder. Tap, tap, tap. My heart was racing now. I grabbed my keys, determined to get out of there. But before I could make it to the front door, something else caught my attention. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. Get out. I froze, my blood running cold. The voice was soft, barely more than a breath, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. My skin prickled as the air around me seemed to thicken, pressing in on me from all sides. Get out. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock in my panic. The second I was outside, I slammed the door shut behind me, my hands trembling. I didn't stop running until I was at the end of the driveway, gasping for breath. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. Maybe the heat had gotten to me. Maybe I was just tired. But deep down, I knew better. I returned to the house the following week, determined to finish my report. This time, I brought a colleague, Sarah, with me. I didn't tell her about the voice. I didn't want her thinking I was crazy. As we explored the upper floors, the atmosphere grew heavier. The second-floor hallway was lined with closed doors, and the air was thick with dust. As we entered the first bedroom, Sarah stopped dead in her tracks. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I held my breath, straining to listen. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then, faintly, I caught it, the sound of a child crying. Sarah's face paled. "This place gives me the creeps." "Can we finish up and get out of here?" I nodded, though my stomach was twisted in knots. We quickly documented the rest of the rooms, but the crying never stopped. It seemed to follow us from room to room, growing louder as we reached the attic. By the time we climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, the crying was deafening. Sarah looked like she was about to bolt, but something compelled me to push forward. The attic door creaked open, revealing a room filled with old furniture and dusty boxes. And in the center of the room, there was a small chair. On the chair sat a doll, its porcelain face cracked, its eyes staring blankly ahead. The crying stopped the moment we stepped into the room. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing: we needed to leave. We turned to go, but the attic door slammed shut with a force that shook the entire house. Sarah screamed, and I ran to the door, yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge, and then we heard it. A voice, low and menacing, coming from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here." The room plunged into darkness. The air was thick with a suffocating presence, and I could feel it. Something was in the room with us. We pounded on the door, screaming for help, but no one came. The house groaned, as if it were alive, as if it were feeding off our fear. Just when I thought we were going to die in that attic, the door flew open on its own. We didn't wait to question it. We ran. I don't know what I experienced in that house, but I'll never forget it. The Hartley house is evil, and whatever haunts it is still there, waiting for its next victim. We never went back, and the Preservation Society abandoned the project. Some houses aren't meant to be saved. There, in the far corner of the attic, something glinted in the beam of my flashlight. It was small, almost hidden beneath an old, moth-eaten blanket draped over a pile of crates. My curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously approached it. As I drew closer, I could make out the faint outline of a small object nestled under the fabric. I knelt down, reaching with trembling fingers to pull back the blanket. My heart thudded in my chest as I uncovered what looked like a small music box. It was ornate, the kind that might have been a cherished possession in another era. The brass was tarnished, but the intricate carvings of flowers and cherubs were still visible beneath the layer of grime. I hesitated for a moment before I opened the lid. With a soft click, the box sprang to life. A hauntingly beautiful melody filled the attic, the notes echoing in the stillness around me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, as if the very air had turned cold. As the melody played, I noticed something else. In the corner where the music box had been hidden, there was something scrawled on the floor. I squinted in the dim light, leaning closer to make out the faded writing. It was a single word, scratched roughly into the wood. Liar. The name sent a jolt of recognition through me. I'd heard it before, buried in the whispers about the Hartley family. Liar Hartley, the youngest daughter. She had died in the house at the age of 6, under mysterious circumstances. The official story was that she had fallen down the stairs, but rumors had always suggested something far more sinister. Something the family had tried to cover up. I stood up quickly, my pulse racing. The attic suddenly felt suffocating, as though the very walls were closing in on me. I needed to leave, now, but as I turned to head back to the stairs, something stopped me in my tracks. From behind me, I heard the faint sound of a child's giggle, the same one I'd heard earlier, except this time it was much closer. My skin prickled with fear as the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of that house as fast as I could, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Then the giggling stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the sound itself. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to glance over my shoulder. The attic was just as I'd left it, empty, still, and filled with nothing but dust and decay. But there, next to the music box, something had changed. Where the name Liar had been scratched into the floor, a second word had now appeared. Leave. I didn't need to be told twice. Grabbing my bag, I bolted down the stairs, the attic door slamming shut behind me with a deafening bang. My heart pounded in my chest as I raced down the hallway, my only thought to get out of the house. By the time I reached the front door, my hands were shaking so badly that it took me a few tries to unlock it. When I finally flung it open, I burst out into the bright afternoon sunlight, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. Instead, I stumbled down the overgrown driveway, the sound of that eerie music still echoing in my ears. That night, I lay awake, the events of the day replaying over and over in my mind. What had I heard? What had I seen? The logical part of me wanted to dismiss it as exhaustion or nerves. But the deeper part of me, the part that had felt the icy grip of fear in that attic, knew the truth. Something was in that house, and it wanted me gone. But here's the thing, despite everything that had happened, I knew I would have to go back. I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the pull of the house, or maybe it was my own need to understand. Whatever it was, I had to see this through. I had to find out what had happened to Leah Hartley, and why her spirit still lingered in that decaying mansion. But deep down, I feared that the house wouldn't let me leave a second time. The whisper seemed to linger in the still air, as though the walls themselves had spoken. My breath caught in my throat. "Who's still here?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper, hoping that whatever was in the room would respond. For several heartbeats, there was nothing but oppressive silence. Then, the faintest of sounds, like the gentle scrape of something being dragged across the floor, came from behind me. Slowly, I turned, dread pooling in my stomach. The rocking chair, the one that had been still when I entered, was moving again. This time, it wasn't slow. It swayed violently, rocking back and forth as if something unseen sat in it, forcing it into motion with increasing urgency. "He's still here, ... The voice came again, clearer now, and unmistakably close. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing. No one. Just that damned chair. A cold draft swept through the attic, and with it came a sudden sensation, like icy fingers brushing against the back of my neck. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively backed toward the door, my flashlight flickering in my trembling hands. The whisper returned, this time sounding more urgent, more ... alive. "He's waiting for you." A sharp bang echoed from behind me, and I whipped around to see that the attic door, the only exit, had slammed shut. I bolted for it, my hand reaching out for the old brass knob, but it wouldn't budge. My breath came in short gasps as I rattled the door, trying to force it open. Suddenly, I felt something brush past me, just a faint movement of air, but enough to set off every alarm in my body. My skin crawled as an overwhelming sense of being watched overtook me. Slowly, I turned back toward the attic's far corner, toward the rocking chair, now completely still once more. But it wasn't the chair that drew my attention this time. It was the figure standing behind it. In the dim glow of my failing flashlight, I could make out the outline of a man. He was tall, his body gaunt, with a pale face that seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the darkness. His eyes, they were hollow, empty voids that bore into me with such intensity that I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Edgar," I managed to choke out, though my voice trembled with fear. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It simply stared, its presence suffocating. And then, without warning, it took a step forward. I stumbled back, panic surging through me. My back hit the attic door, still locked, still trapping me in with whatever Edgar Hartley had become. "You should have left ... double quotes." The voice came again, though now I knew it wasn't just in my head. It echoed all around me, as if the house itself had come alive to mock my fear. The figure took another step closer, and the air around me grew impossibly cold. My vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges, and I felt a crushing weight settle on my chest, as if invisible hands were closing around my throat. I clawed at the door behind me, desperate, gasping for breath as Edgar came closer, his hollow eyes fixated on mine. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices swirling in my head. "Leave." But I couldn't. I was trapped. With the last ounce of strength I had, I slammed my fist against the door, over and over again, praying that someone would hear me. And then, just as the darkness threatened to swallow me whole, the door flew open with a loud crack. I tumbled backward into the hallway, gasping for air as the door behind me slammed shut. The oppressive weight vanished, and the cold receded as quickly as it had come. For a moment, I just lay there panting, staring up at the ceiling, too terrified to move. When I finally gathered the courage to look back at the attic door, there was nothing. No sounds, no whispers, no ghostly figure of Edgar Hartley. Just silence. I didn't go back into that house after that night. I couldn't. Whatever curiosity or obsession had driven me before was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-chilling fear. The Hartley house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wanted something from me. I handed in my resignation the next day, leaving the restoration project unfinished. The Historical Society didn't question my decision, and I didn't offer an explanation. Some things were better left unsaid. But even now, months later, I still can't shake the feeling that the house isn't done with me. Every so often, in the dead of night, I wake to the sound of a rocking chair creaking somewhere in the distance, or the faint echo of a child's laughter carried on the wind. And I wonder, if I ever go back, will I be able to leave a second time? Or will I join Edgar, forever trapped in that house, waiting for the next fool to come along? The moment I stepped away from Willow Street, I realized there are places in this world where darkness isn't just a metaphor. It's alive. That house still haunts my dreams. The image of Edgar Hartley burned into my mind. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear faint whispers, or catch the flicker of a shadow in the corner of my eye. No matter how far I run, the house, the Hartleys, they're never far behind. I've tried to forget, to pretend it was just my imagination. But deep down, I know the truth. I know what I saw. The house, its secrets, they're not done with me. Not yet. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Curiosity can be deadly. Stay away from places that seem to call out to you, whispering their forgotten stories. Because some stories should never be uncovered, and some houses should never be entered. The Hartley house is waiting. And one day, it will call to someone again. Just make sure it's not you. I had just drifted into a deep sleep when everything changed. My dreams were invaded, turning dark and horrifying. In one moment, I was surrounded by the screams of people burning in a house fire, the flames licking the walls and engulfing everything. Then, without warning, I was thrown into a scene of war. Missiles flew through the air, crashing into buildings, sending debris and chaos everywhere. It was too vivid, too real. I knew deep inside. These weren't my dreams. Something was forcing me to see this. I had to wake up. Jerking myself out of the nightmare, I shot up in bed, heart pounding in my chest. That's when I felt it. Something lurking just on the other side of my closed bedroom door. The room was pitch black, but I could feel it. And worse, I could smell it. Decay, rot, something foul creeping in through the crack beneath my door. The air felt thick, oppressive, like its malevolent presence was filling the room. I wasn't alone. It hated me. I could feel that hatred as strongly as if it were a living thing. It wanted me. My soul, filled with bright, white light, innocent, pure, was a target for this entity. Its darkness was overpowering, like a bottomless pit you could fall into and never escape. I couldn't see it with my eyes, but in my mind's eye, I could make out its form. Its grin, crooked, sinister, stretched impossibly wide. Black smoke began to gather, swirling around my legs. I felt it grip my right leg and yank. I slid toward the edge of my bed, panic surging through my veins. This was no dream. In that moment, I tapped into my light. Deep within my soul, I gathered every ounce of the white energy that lived there and blasted it toward my feet. The dark grip released instantly. I scrambled back to the center of the bed, gasping, my heart racing faster than ever. But it wasn't done. Before I could finish my thoughts, the entity's darkness hit me in the chest like a freight train. It spread over my body, seeping into every pore. My head spun, and a tingling numbness took over. My soul felt like it was on fire, my mind screaming, "Let me go." I focused. I drew all of the light from my soul, sucking it into a tight ball of energy, airtight, so that the entity couldn't take it. Then, with everything I had, I blasted that light outwards, like a bomb detonating inside me. It spread through my body, filling every corner of my mind, burning the darkness away. Suddenly, it stopped. I could feel the entity retreat, slithering back under my door. But it didn't leave. I knew it was still there, waiting. It was too stubborn to be banished so easily. I steadied my breath, still shaking. "You're not welcome here," I whispered. "Leave me and my family alone." I started blessing everything in my mind, my room, the house, the people I loved, everything. I imagined white light spreading over all of it, sealing every door and window, covering every inch of space with protection. Then, the entity let out a scream, a high-pitched, unnatural squeal. My door rattled violently, as if it was trying to force its way in one last time. But it couldn't. My light had enveloped the house, blocking its path. After a final, bone-chilling shake, it was gone, banished to the dark depths from where it came. I sat there for a long moment, breathing hard, trying to steady myself. This wasn't the first time I had encountered something like this. I've dealt with these dark entities before. They hate that I can see them, that I can help lost souls pass on, and most of all, that I can banish them. Finally, I turned on my Himalayan salt lamp, its warm glow flooding the room with positive energy. I put on Pirates of the Caribbean, my comfort movie, letting the familiar music soothe my nerves. Slowly, sleep found me again, but this time, the darkness stayed away. The battle was over, for now, but I knew it wouldn't be the last time. These entities always come back, but I'll be ready. I have the light, and it will always protect me. When Jake came home yesterday morning, he asked me why the porch was covered in cat food. Confused, I nervously opened the front door to see what he meant. The entire bowl of cat food had been flipped over, and pieces of crushed kibble were scattered across the porch like someone had stomped it into the ground. Strangely, the food on the back porch was untouched. I tried to explain what had been happening while Jake was away. I guess the idea of a meowing creature haunting me was too bizarre for him to process. He pulled up our Ring camera and started reviewing footage from around 2 a.m. I didn't want to watch it. I couldn't, so I just sat there, waiting, my heart racing. After a few minutes, Jake looked disturbed but still skeptical. "It's probably some teenager pulling a messed-up prank on us," he said. "Let's move both cat food bowls to the back porch from now on." I didn't agree with him. "Moving the food won't stop whatever's out there from watching me, Jake," I argued. "It meows. It's sitting outside the window, mimicking a cat. I think we need to leave the house." Jake sighed in frustration. "We can't just move. Our money's tied up in this place, and we've got 6 months left on the lease." "Forget the lease," I shot back. "I don't care about that." I care about feeling safe in my own home. We went back and forth for a while, but in the end, Jake was right. We had nowhere to go on short notice. The nearest hotel was too far from Jake's job. Reluctantly, I gave in, and we compromised. He agreed to get new curtains for the living room and upgrade our doorbell camera. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. I went to work and picked up some heavy, dark brown curtains on my way home. They blocked out nearly all the light, which wasn't ideal for a living room, but would make sure I didn't see any shadows outside at night. When I got home, I noticed Bella, our dog, hadn't touched her food all day. She was curled up in a pile of laundry in the back room, clearly disturbed. I tried to let her out, but she wouldn't go unless I went with her. Toby, the orange tabby from next door, stopped by, as usual, rubbing against Bella's legs. Normally, she liked him, but when Toby meowed, Bella growled at him, startling both of us. Bella never growled at cats, ever. Something was wrong. That night, I decided I wasn't sitting in the living room alone again. Before Jake left for work, I gathered everything I needed and locked myself in the bedroom. Bella followed me and curled up at my side. I turned the TV up, hoping to drown out any noises that might come from outside. Around 2 a.m., the familiar sound started again. A dragging noise came from below the window, just like before. Bella started shaking. I turned the TV volume higher, hoping to block it out, but I couldn't ignore the loud bang that followed. Bang, bang, bang. The noises grew louder, almost as if whoever, or whatever, was outside was getting frustrated. I cranked up the volume, but the banging intensified, shaking the walls of the house. I felt sick to my stomach with dread. If I didn't respond, would it try to break in? Reluctantly, I muted the TV and crept toward the window. I only opened it a tiny crack, just enough to speak. "Go away," I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. Bella shook violently behind me, like she did during thunderstorms or fireworks. What followed made my blood run cold. "Go away," the voice outside mimicked, but it wasn't a normal voice. It was garbled, wet, as though someone was speaking with a mouthful of water. "Go away, go away, go away, go away," it repeated, each time sounding more like my own voice. Like it was practicing. The banging resumed, harder than before. Bang. "Go away," it mocked. Bang, bang, bang. "Go away." Then came the dragging again, slow this time, deliberate. It was circling the house, moving toward my window. I froze. My instinct told me to hide, to crawl back into bed and pretend this wasn't happening. Bang, bang, bang. The sound climbed the side of the house, growing louder as it neared. My breath caught in my throat. I managed to drop the curtain back in place just as something slapped against the window, hard. I stumbled backward, falling to the floor. From the other side of the window, I heard it. Meow. That was it. I scrambled up, grabbed Bella, and bolted for the bathroom. We locked ourselves in, and I didn't move for the rest of the night. The bathroom had no windows, and that was all that mattered. Bella curled up next to me, still trembling, and we waited in silence until Jake came home. When Jake got back, he wanted to know why I didn't answer his calls during his break. He doesn't really believe me. He thinks I had some sort of waking nightmare. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. Something was out there. Something banged on my walls, mimicked my voice, and crawled up to my window. The greasy handprint it left behind on the glass proves it.